I call this meeting to order. This is the 92nd meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. I want to welcome our guest witnesses here today. We are, pursuant to Standing Order 83.1, continuing our pre-budget consultations for 2012. Colleagues, we have two panels before us this afternoon, early evening. In our first panel, we have 6 organizations presenting. We have, first of all, Building and Construction Trades Department, AFL-CIO. We have the Canadian Bureau for International Education. We have the Canadian Psychological Association. We have the Council of Ontario Universities. We have the Grain Growers of Canada. And we have the Nature Conservancy Canada. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being with us here this afternoon. You each have 5 minutes maximum for an opening statement. And we'll start with Mr. Smiley, and we'll work our way down the panel here. Please begin.
Thank you. Greetings, members of the committee, chair, and fellow witnesses. I hope to give you a tip of the spear view today of where we see the world and how Budget 2013 can hopefully solidify Canada's economic recovery and set us on the right path for the future. And we are the Canadian Building Trades. We represent skilled tradespeople who go to work every day on Canada's infrastructure, energy, mega, and even small construction projects. The construction industry represents just under 12% of GDP, and we represent about 550,000 workers, all voluntary members, by the way. And we thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. So what helped us survive the recession? The same two things which will help Canada grow and solidify gains in 2013 and beyond: infrastructure and the energy sector. We need a budget in 2013 which makes a significant overhaul of labour market initiatives and skills policy to ensure investment in our country isn't foregone because Canada can't build it. If we're serious about the energy superpower status, we need to get the people thing right. If we don't, other jurisdictions will. So what are these labour market and skill policy fixes we need to get right? First of all, labour market development agreements with provincial jurisdictions that should prescribe and measure training goals for new Red Seal apprentices. And also the graduation of current students into journey persons are needed to ensure growth. A shrinking workforce and a broken training system is a recipe for disaster in the economy. Allocate existing unaccountable LMDA funding to provincial governments differently, so employers are encouraged to hire construction apprentices either financially or through a tax incentive. We submit no more money spent on redundant websites or studies by provinces, content of which already exists in the public domain. The federal government should be interested in getting value for money already allocated for distribution to the provinces in these deals. Given the Government of Canada is a funder of provincial education systems, there should be financial consideration given to those who have tangible results to show. Minister Oliver's common sense plan for regulation reform in the energy sector needs to be coupled with practical labour market solutions. There is no possibility our economy gets built out with an underperforming labour market. I stress this is a free solution, as these labour market deals already exist. The policy leadership required is free, and we see no reason to not proceed. Primarily, the Government of Canada needs to ensure barriers to employment for Canadians are low. For example, there needs to be sufficient incentive for companies to hire young Canadians whom otherwise would not work and contribute to society, provided that these positions lead to real jobs. We submit there should be a procurement policy in place on federal government construction sites, encouraging contractors to hire young Canadians or Aboriginals registered in Red Seal trades. Some of the energy partners we work with in Alberta require training plans to be submitted to them on a regular basis. This requirement is part of the commercial terms between the purchaser of construction and the companies that actually do the work. It's been wildly successful in Alberta in training and retaining young people at large energy projects. Some sites like Suncor and Shell have 30% apprentices on site. These kinds of innovative programs would work when Public Works is buying construction. It costs nothing to implement and serves a public policy goal. If it's sound public policy to get the best price for work, which it is sound public policy to make sure that people get trained on the work paid by tax dollars. So I said it in the Financial Post 14 days ago, and I'll say it again. There's a pending demographic time bomb in construction. Massive retirements coupled with relatively new entrant numbers and increasing economic demand on our industry could cripple growth. Check out my HUMA testimony from May if you want more details on the who, where, what, when, and why. In this context, there are primarily two levers that can be pulled by the Government of Canada: the apprenticeship and training system and immigration. The apprenticeship system is largely managed by the provincial jurisdiction, but is completely funded by the Government of Canada. StatCan tells us that registrations are trending upwards, which is a good thing, but graduation rates from apprenticeship curriculum in Canada is fairly low and is not on the rise. There is little or no incentive for people to progress through the curriculum. I'm getting the 1-minute hook. The federal government has tried to assist through the implementation of the Apprenticeship Incentive Grant. We think it should be extended to year 3 and year 4. Currently only covers year 1 and 2. The benefit amount should be increased. If we take a look at some of the other things the Government of Canada spends money on, no offense to the research and development community, $2.6 billion is allocated to SR&ED tax credits. $89 million is spent on apprenticeship and employment tax credit issues. There's a real discrepancy there, and it's free to reallocate money from one program to another. So if we're really concerned about skill shortages, if we're really concerned about these kinds of things, we'll take a look at money we're spending and make sure we're getting value for money. Quickly, the last thing I would say is mobility of Canadian workers impacts productivity. And if we want to improve productivity in our country, it's a really good idea to look at a system which encourages mobility for skilled trades workers. One part of the country where there's a shortage of work, places where those workers would be in demand. So let's take a look at that. I've handed out my policy to the Minister of Finance at Starbucks and on his policy retreat, etc. So he has it. I think it's time, and you could talk to our employers. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Canadian Bureau for International Education. Please.
Good afternoon. I thank you for taking the time to hear from me today. I am Scott McAlpine, and I am pleased to be here on behalf of the Canadian Bureau for International Education, or CBIE, of which I am a board member. I'm also the president of Douglas College, which is a long-standing member of CBIE. Douglas has 2 campuses in Metro Vancouver, and we have over 1,000 international students currently studying at Douglas. CBIE is Canada's national membership organization dedicated to international education. CBIE comprises 150 member institutions across Canada, covering the whole education spectrum from K-12 to postgraduate. We are committed to making Canada a global leader in international education. CBIE plays a leadership role in the Canadian Consortium for International Education Marketing, and this organization has unified and coordinated the sector like never before, ensuring that we are well positioned to play a leadership role in partnership with government in order to ensure a strong return on our investments. CBIE provided a written online submission to this committee in August. We concluded, CBIE recommends that the government provide substantial, sustained investment for a comprehensive international education strategy delivered in partnership with key stakeholders in order to achieve concrete results based on ambitious targets for international student enrollment and study abroad opportunities for Canadians. The points I want to amplify today are that Canada is well positioned to take a leadership role in international education, and that this will require a substantial, sustained investment. The benefits of this investment are for our economy and for our students. Our youth are the future leaders of tomorrow. Our recommendation was bolstered by the report of the Advisory Panel on Canada's International Education Strategy, appointed by the Honourable Jim Flaherty and the Honourable Ed Fast. CBIE supports all of the panel's recommendations that together are designed to make Canada the 21st century leader in international education. So, what kind of leader can we be? The panel clearly integrated the messages provided by CBIE and the consortium. The panel claimed and aimed to position Canada not only to attract top talent from abroad, but also to prepare our citizens for a global society and marketplace. In other words, they aim to position Canada to develop a labor force that can ensure our country's prosperity in the short term and into the future. We need to invest more, however. To give this some perspective, in 2010, Canada enrolled about 5% of the total world's international students, putting us in 7th position worldwide. Australia, a country of similar size, received 7% of the international student market, putting it in 4th position. To concretize some of the benefits of international education, consider the following. In 2010, international students in Canada spent more than $7.7 billion all in. Education services are now Canada's 11th largest export industry and our single largest export to China. In BC, international education is the 4th largest export industry and is moving quickly into 3rd. Moreover, international education is witnessing worldwide expansion. The OECD estimates that the global demand is set to grow to nearly 4.1 million students in 2010 to 7.2 in 2025. We need, as a country, to tap into this large and expanding resource. And what about Canadian students? Providing Canadian students with international opportunities allows them to acquire global perspectives and contribute to what Governor-General David Johnston has termed the diplomacy of knowledge.
1 minute.
Thank you. The Governor-General is also CBIE's patron and just last week helped us to launch our blog Without Borders. But at present, only 3% of Canadian university students and 1.1% of college students participate in exchange programs. Compare this to Germany, where 33% do. Just this month, the Australian government announced $38.5 million for 10,000 students to study abroad, and in 2011, Brazil announced 100,000 scholarships for study abroad. CBIE urges the committee to consider, at minimum, a ramp-up from the current $5 million per annum investment by the federal government to $25 million within the next 3 years, with a significant amount of this total dedicated toward enhancing our current scholarship offer and to build momentum for providing international experience for Canadian students. We also urge that the government consider the Council for International Education and Research and to fund that well as well. In short, CBIE urges this committee to take forward our message and support the recommendations that will permit us to realize its potential as a global leader in international education. I thank the committee for its time today.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Canadian Psychological Association.
Thank you for the invitation to present today on behalf of the Canadian Psychological Association. CPA is the National Association for the Science, Practice and Education of Psychology in Canada. With almost 7,000 members and affiliates, we are Canada's largest national association of psychologists. Psychologists engage in research, practice and education in human behavior, the very foundation of successful societies and economies. In terms of practice, psychologists are the largest regulated, specialized mental health care providers in the country, outnumbering psychiatrists about 4 to 1. We help people recover from common mental disorders like anxiety and depression. We help them manage chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease, these often associated with mental health factors. When it comes to mental disorders, psychological treatments are among the most effective. The mental health needs of Canadians and the toll these take on individuals, families, the workplace and the economy are substantial. In any given year, 1 in 5 people live with a mental health problem, with estimated costs to the economy of $51 billion. Mental health problems and disorders account for nearly 30% of short and long-term disability claims. This means that as a large employer, the Government of Canada feels the impact of mental health on the workforce very directly. According to recent media reports, on a given day, 19,000 public servants are on sick leave. In 2011, more than 47% of new disability claims were for mental health conditions, led by depression and anxiety. Despite the mental health needs of Canadians and despite the fact that we have psychological treatments that work, the services of psychologists are not funded by public health insurance plans. This makes them inaccessible to many Canadians with modest incomes or no insurance. Although there are some publicly funded services in Canada, these are in short supply and wait lists are long. When people have access to extended health benefits through employment, caps on these benefits are often too low to afford meaningful treatment. The United Kingdom, Australia and Norway have mental health initiatives at the federal level, which include covering the services of psychologists through the public health systems. Canada's federal government has a crucial role to play when it comes to funding health care, participating in innovation and collaborating with the provinces and territories. Federal government is the 5th largest provider of health care in the country. It can lead by example by improving its capacity to deliver effective services in areas for which it has direct responsibility. Further, as a large employer itself, the government can do much to innovate when it comes to psychological health in the workplace and provide meaningful coverage for care when needed. The recruitment and retention of psychologists to work in federal departments is a pressing issue. The need for mental health services in the military is acute. In some cases, soldiers wait months before a psychologist is available to them. Access to psychological services within Correctional Services Canada are inadequate, and yet research shows that psychological interventions address mental health issues and reduce recidivism in this population, the latter important to individual and public protection. And finally, the federal government funds research. We need to ensure that there's sufficient core funding for the granting agencies to support inquiry into the psychological factors central to Canadians' health and wellness, factors that can inform and guide public policy. Our pre-budget submission includes a number of workable solutions. I will highlight 6 of them now. First, to set up an innovation fund to assist provinces and territories in developing a sustainable mental health infrastructure that will improve access to evidence-based psychological services. 2, create federal residency placements for psychologists within federal departments that provide health services. Psychologists often stay to work where they do their residency training, yet in many provinces there is greater demand for positions than supply. 3, many rural and remote communities in Canada are lacking the psychological care they need. Physicians and nurses now receive Canada's student loan forgiveness under the Can Learn program. We recommend expanding the program to include new psychologists. 4th, revisit the extended healthcare insurance plans for federal public employees. Make sure that coverage provided for psychological services affords the employee meaningful levels of service. 5, remove the requirement that an employee of the federal public service must get a referral from a medical doctor before qualifying for reimbursement for psychological services. Psychologists can diagnose and treat psychological disorders. Other insurance plans do not have this gatekeeper requirement, one that creates unnecessary delays in getting treatment to people who need from those trained to deliver it. And finally, ensure core research funding for granting councils and funding for students that recognizes the role of psychological factors in research, particularly in health and the neurosciences. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Council of Ontario Universities.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Stephen Liss, and I'm the Vice Principal Research at Queen's University. On behalf of the Council of Ontario Universities, I'd like to thank you for providing us with the opportunity to appear before you today. COU is the voice of Ontario's 21 universities. Our campuses are home to nearly 450,000 students, or 40% of all students across Canada. Our institutions are unified by a shared commitment to student success, research excellence, and community engagement. We believe strongly in the power of education and research and its ability to transform individuals, communities, and our country. I'm here to speak about issues that I know are important to you and all Canadians: productivity, job creation, economic recovery, and demographic change. Most specifically, I'm here to talk to you about the key role that Ontario universities play in helping you to address these issues. Productivity is directly linked to our ability to be forward-thinking, innovative, and nimble. This means that our graduates must bring with them into the workplace well-developed skills and knowledge. It also means that in a world of rapid changes, our students must graduate armed not only with the skills required for today's marketplace, but also with the ability to evolve their skills to meet the needs of the marketplace of tomorrow. Ontario University faculty and staff excel at ensuring that our graduates are equipped with the foundational skills and experience that they require as they transition to the labour force. They also challenge and teach our students to find new ways of looking at old problems, to critically assess and interpret information, and to change their minds and their ways of doing things in light of new knowledge. The tools of their trade are knowledge transmission and self-directed learning acquired through classroom education, as well as hands-on experiences in labs, libraries, workplaces, and within communities. Canada's 3 granting agencies, NSERC, SSHRC, and CIHR, as well as the Canada Foundation for Innovation, provide critical funding to support the training opportunities and experiences that our students need to remain flexible and innovative throughout their careers. These investments also allow faculty, students, and staff to develop industry partnerships that catalyze direct economic benefits to Canadians. Ontario universities encourage the federal government to continue to enhance its investments in its core research programs through the federal granting agencies, CFI, and indirect costs of research, with a particular emphasis on student training through graduate and postdoctoral awards and scholarships. Job creation is about leveraging the talents and skills of Canadians to both sustain and grow the Canadian marketplace. Data analytics is an area of strong competitive advantage of Canada. Canadians are amongst the best in the world at interpreting and manipulating data, and we are global leaders in data visualization, modeling, and story development. In his recent speech to the World Economic Forum, Prime Minister Harper spoke of the government's commitment to technology. He stated that the government is just beginning to comprehensively modernize our approach to research and innovation policy in order to get better commercial results for the significant government investments we make in scientific and technological development. Data and our ability to use it will be the global currency of the future. In order to leverage our existing talents and to ensure that Canadians enjoy the economic benefits of this emerging market, investment in and the development of a national framework for data infrastructure is required. Ontario universities encourage the federal government to build on its existing investment in data infrastructure and consider the creation of a data infrastructure program as part of its commitment to ensuring Canadian research is modern, relevant, and responsive, as well as being globally connected and globally competitive. Strong economic recovery requires a strong, talented, and diverse workforce. Canadians are our greatest national natural resource, but our demographic makeup has changed and our society is aging. Our ability to combat the effects of our shrinking workforce will be built on our capacity to be more nimble, innovative, and productive than our competitors. It will also require us to strengthen our ability to attract and retain new Canadians and to create new and strategic partnerships with others elsewhere in the world. While we continue to emphasize the value of brain gain, we are in an era of brain circulation. Ontario universities are key partners in all of these activities. To help deal with skill and labour shortages that are anticipated in Canada's future, we encourage the federal government to make international education and research a pillar of the Government of Canada's foreign policy and economic growth objectives.
1 minute.
As part of this commitment, we ask the federal government to continue its critical investments in programs such as the Canada Research Chairs, the Vanier Canada Graduate Scholarships, and to provide nimble and flexible resources so that Canadian researchers can pursue a first-mover advantage in global research partnerships. As a final comment today, I'd like to emphasize the importance of assuring the success of Aboriginal students. Ontario universities are deeply committed to this, and we encourage the federal government to consider new areas of investment that will increase Aboriginal high school completion and expand access and success to post-secondary education and beyond for Aboriginal learners. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Grain Growers of Canada, please.
Good. Thank you very much. My name is Richard Phillips. I'm with the Grain Growers of Canada, and I have a small farm in Saskatchewan. The Grain Growers represents over 50,000 grain farmers from across Canada. But before I start, I showed up in my shirt today and reminded of Roy Atkinson. He was very active in the NDP party in Saskatchewan for many, many years. And one time he was asked, well, why didn't you show up in a suit? He said, you showed up in your working clothes, I showed up in mine. That's the way it is. So that'll be my excuse why I'm wearing a shirt, not a suit today. In the grain and oilseed sector, we're very fortunate. We've had a couple good years with good crops and good prices overall in Canada. So we're not here today looking for big money. We have seen in Western Canada massive change with the ending of the Canadian Wheat Board monopoly. And it's now time to look at the regulatory environment to say how can we be even more successful with the new opportunities available. The Government of Canada does fund research and innovation through Agriculture Canada, universities, agri-marketing programs, and science clusters where they work with producers. Most of those programs actually work quite good. However, we always feel there's room to improve those, and so we encourage the government to sit down with us in the new environment and the opportunities there and say, how can we do even better now that we've worked in these programs for a couple of years? We'd also like to look at a number of other issues in terms of the regulatory environment that will allow us to be successful. Number one, we need to clean up the Canadian Grain Commission. We need to get that regulations in place so that we can continue to export grain the way we need to. We need a more predictable variety registration process. We have a lot of people interested in breeding wheat in Canada right now, and they're prepared to bring dollars in, but our system is still quite archaic. It's set up for 20, 30, 40 years ago, and so there's a lot of modernizing we need to do in there. Thirdly, there's a rail service review. We spent years and years working on cleaning up the rail service so that shippers have a better opportunity to negotiate with the railways. We understand legislation is coming soon. We ask you and encourage you to support this and don't lose faith. You'll be under a lot of pressure from the railways to back down on things. Stay with the producers. Over 90% of the shippers in Canada are united in that we have to have change. If 90% of your customers aren't happy, then maybe you're the problem. Lastly, trade negotiations. And I'd like to recognize all three political parties. The Liberals, Mr. Bryson is here, former trade critic, very supportive of trade deals. The NDP have been signaling lately they're much more open to looking at trade deals if it's good for Canada. And the Conservatives, of course, have been very open on trade deals and, in fact, leading a lot of our negotiations. So the United States is a big market for us, but so is Morocco, the EU, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, India, China, Japan. we can grow great crops. We have lots of land in Canada. We just need markets to sell them into, and that's really, really important. So work with us to ensure that we do the research and innovation correctly, that we leverage even more money out of the private sector and public sector and producers for research, and give us that business environment and market access to be successful. We as farmers want to make our living from the marketplace. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from Nature Conservancy Canada, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. On behalf of the Nature Conservancy of Canada, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to present to you today as you consider recommendations for Budget 2013. I'd also like to thank the government for the bold steps it has taken in recent budgets to enhance the conservation of lands, both public and private, including the expansion of our national park system and the investment in the Natural Areas Conservation Partnership Program. As Canada's largest non-profit private land conservation organization, the Nature Conservancy of Canada brings a unique perspective to the budget discussions. In just 9 days, we will celebrate our 50th anniversary. With the help of our partners, we have conserved more than 2.6 million acres to date, habitat that supports many of our species at risk. We work in every province with the help of more than 48,000 supporters. In the few minutes we have, I'd like to leave you with two thoughts. First, that land conservation is not a luxury. It is integral to sustained economic recovery and growth. And second, renewal of the Natural Areas Conservation Partnership Program will deliver on-the-ground results that benefit nature and Canadians. Canada has led the world in its recovery from the global economic recession, but we must remain vigilant if we're going to achieve a full recovery and enhance sustainable economic growth. We believe it is possible to realize the goal of sustained economic recovery and enhanced growth while conserving our natural heritage and our working landscapes. In fact, we believe the two are tied together. In real economic terms, nature provides valuable goods and services such as cleaning our air and water, flood control, and carbon storage. Conserving these services is essential for thriving communities, robust employment, and economic growth. Land conservation directly contributes to our quality of life. Our natural heritage is one of our competitive advantages. It is woven into our Canadian identity and brand. Accessibility of our natural areas to major Canadian centres contributes to our high standard of living and makes Canada an attractive country in which to invest, live, work, and play. Conservation contributes to a healthy environment, which in turn is a foundation for a strong economy. Budget 2013 presents an opportunity to ensure we continue to build upon our conservation achievements for the sake of all Canadians. The Natural Areas Conservation Program is a Canadian success story, one that the Nature Conservancy of Canada has been proud to lead, and funding for this program will soon expire. It was launched in 2007 by the Government of Canada with an initial investment of $225 million. The program is the largest commitment by any Canadian government to the conservation of natural spaces through the protection of private lands. This unique public-private partnership invests in direct on-the-ground action. The results speak for themselves. More than 835,000 acres, that's 3,400 square kilometers, has been conserved to date. And to put it another way, that's 1,100 NHL-sized hockey rinks every day since March 2007. Natural habitat has been protected for 126 species at risk and 450 species of conservation concern. And through matching funding, we're delivering almost $3 of conservation for every dollar invested by the government. How we match these funds? By engaging more Canadians in the conservation mission. Our partners come from all walks of life and all corners of Canada: individuals, landowners, communities, provincial governments, other conservation organizations, First Nations, and industry. They have worked with us through the program to create win-win solutions from coast to coast to coast. The program is an innovative approach that delivers measurable results and maximum value for taxpayer dollar. I invite you to read more about it in the materials that we've submitted to the committee. We urge the committee to support renewal of the Natural Area Conservation Program in Budget 2013. We propose a renewed investment of $250 million over 5 years, and that will yield an additional 3,200 square kilometers of conserved land and more than $700 million in conservation. As a signatory to the Convention on Biological Diversity, Canada is committed to ensuring 17% of our lands and inland waters are protected by 2020. We believe that with innovative programs such as the Natural Area Conservation Program, Canada can achieve this by 2017, our 150th birthday. As the Finance Minister himself has said, the environment and the economy are inextricably linked. Canada can lead the way both economically and in terms of the conservation of our natural estate. I look forward to answering questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll begin members' questions with Ms. Nash for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Welcome to all of the witnesses. Very diverse and interesting presentations. And unfortunately, we only get 5 minutes to ask you questions to all of you. So I'll try to fit as much as I can in. First, Ms. Cohen, to you. You raised some very bracing statistics that 1 in 5 persons in any given year is affected by mental illness. 30% of short-term and long-term disability, and $51 billion impact on our economy. Now, I know anecdotally mental health is a huge issue in communities across Canada. It's certainly a big issue in my community where we see low-income people with mental health problems, although I know it can affect people at any income level, obviously. A few years ago, Senator Kirby released a report, I think in 2006, that made over 100 recommendations. The kinds of recommendations that you're making today about increasing access to psychologists, were they part of the Kirby report? And have any of these recommendations that you folks that were involved in, have they been actioned?
Yes, I think following Senator Kirby's report, when the Mental Health Commission recently came out with its national strategy for mental health, as you know, and certainly one of their key recommendations is that we do a better job at enhancing access to evidence-based service. So prevention and promotion, workplace mental health are all critically important, but the reality is when the 1 in 5 persons develops a mental health problem, we need to do a better job at getting them the care they need.
And have you noticed an increase in services, or is this kind of a work in progress?
I think it's still a work in progress. The Mental Health Commission only released its strategy in the spring, early summer. And of course, there's lots of work to be done to address it, particularly in the jurisdictions. So, you know, figuring many solutions to that problem. We have a ways to go.
Have you done any costing as to the impact on Medicare if psychologists were accessible as medical doctors are accessible to anyone without a referral and without private payment?
I'm glad you asked that question because, you know, as psychologists, we can tell you a lot about the research that shows what's effective when it comes to mental health problems. What we haven't done is great a job at being able to tell you what it would cost to do a better job to address them. So we, in fact, as an association, have commissioned a business case from a group of health economists, which will be due out early in the year to actually be able to answer that question. What would a business model look like for Canada? And likely it will produce a variety of models, whether it's employer-provided, private insurer, public insurer. So yes, we want to be able to help answer that question.
Okay, and presumably it would also put a dent in that $51 billion cost.
Well, that would be the hope. Our position is you pay now or pay later.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Mr. Liss, I wanted to ask you, you raised both in your presentation and also in your brief to our committee, you talked about Aboriginal communities, and I noted in your brief that you said, and it's a shocking statistic, 60% of students on reserve, high school students, and 43% off reserve drop out and don't complete their high school education and therefore never make it to the university sector. You've raised that as an issue. What kinds of suggestions do you have to reach back into the public school system to help those students prepare themselves for an opportunity to learn in the post-secondary system?
Well, I think the important driver is mentorship, leadership within the community, and the universities in particular, and I say specifically at Queen's, where we have a number of examples, both in the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science and School of Policy Studies, where we're supporting increasing engagement of Aboriginal students in our programs and creating a receptive environment on our campuses, which is occurring across Canada in many ways, to try to increase the numbers of students in and engaged in post-secondary education, and I'll give them the opportunity to pursue those programs, and then assisting them in developing mentorship capacity and leadership capacity and reaching out. I think this is a clearly important point, and I think the universities are just beginning, really, in many respects, addressing their own campuses with respect to the type of destination that's receptive, welcoming, and inclusive, and increasing those numbers, and eventually growing up that population and the successes coming from that. Okay. I can say specifically, in my own case, I have a graduate student who's just finished a master's degree, a member of the Micmac community, and I think getting individuals like Bailey and others who can go back into their community and work is important.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Nash. Ms. Glover, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. And just on that note, Mr. Liss, I'm glad you brought it up, because I know in Winnipeg, which is where I'm from, the Aboriginal Centre is doing a fantastic job, funded primarily by funds from the federal government. They've actually partnered with the aerospace industry, and the aerospace industry is helping to train Aboriginals in a very, very critical sector. And we've seen some tremendous success stories. So I'm glad that you mentioned the successes along with the failures. We have more work to do, but boy, oh boy, we've got some really, really talented Aboriginal people coming out of these programs. So I'm glad that you recognize it. I do want to ask Mr. Smiley some questions. I'm a mom who has a son who went away to be a carpenter, went to Alberta, and so I appreciate very much all of the hard work that your association does, because my son brags about you all the time. Now, having said that, when he went and moved, housing was an issue. So I appreciate what you're saying about this mobility tax credit, but I'm interested in hearing from you what solutions we would have on housing, because I mean, when he got there, he had to live with 4 other people in a house, which was difficult. Many people who move are living in trailers. So how can we partner with you to solve that problem? Because mobility is one thing, but where do they stay is the other.
Yep, great question. So there's really 3 ways that it happens in Alberta or anywhere across the country where there's a large concentration of work. You're either in a camp, which is provided by your employer, or you get a living out allowance from your employer. It might be anywhere between $90 a day and $125 a day, as we all know. He
didn't get that.
Yeah.
None of that.
Yeah.
So how do we partner with you to make sure that that is happening in a way that's consistent?
I think on the big jobs, I mean, we can speak to the big jobs, the industrial jobs, but I think the best way to do it is to make sure that there's that the regional economy, and it's hard to control, but there isn't inflation in the regional economy. And when you have a shortage, and that's sort of the key of my presentation, when you have a shortage of skills, costs for everything go up. And so it's disproportionately expensive to live in northern Alberta. That's why some employers go ahead, and some owners, like some of the big oil companies, spend big money to put people up. I think at the end of the day, it's about spreading the workforce across the country. Things happen in regional economies that are hot that really can't be controlled by the government, industry, or players. But I think if we have a sort of a national approach to the workforce, we should be able to avoid those inflationary pressures in small.
Would your organization be willing to partner with government to make an incentive like the mobility tax credit available if on the end side that the companies were also providing some incentive for housing? Because I could see a partnership working like that, but I'd hate to give these tax rates. So you aren't. Well, that's good. The other thing I want to bring up is you talked an awful lot about developing skills in the schools and whatnot, which I think is critical.
Yep.
And so Skills Canada provides about $8.7 million over the next 3 years to do those trade-focused projects. So in Manitoba, for example, I love going to the Young Women's Conferences where your organizations come and actually help train these kids and whatnot. And then we've also got the skills competition that happens every year that I know many of your organizations. How can we continue? We have that program. How can we further enhance that kind of a thing?
It is all about promotion of the skilled trades as a valuable career path, full stop. the Government of Canada can play a significant role in getting to people before they get to high school or while they're in high school, elementary school, saying that this is a valuable career path. So if there's one thing the committee takes out of this is that industry needs help getting to people in the education system.
So would you be supportive of us enhancing that program?
Absolutely. So Skills Canada is a way to promote and get young people involved in the trades. They cover everything from haircutters to construction workers to there's a long list.
Yeah, I've been every year. It's amazing.
Yeah, so that's one way to do it. Absolutely.
Yeah,
We'd be supportive. We'd think about doing it a P3 type of thing with Skill Canada, government, industry, and whomever else. Absolutely.
That's very, very insightful. Now you did 1 minute. Oh, 20 seconds. Responsible development. Thank you for acknowledging Minister Olivers. Just expand on that. What do you think? Why do you think that was important, those measures?
So it's important to get the regulation stuff right to spur investment, but we need to make sure the labor market policy is in tune with that. We can't roll out these great steps in terms of getting our country developed without making sure that the labor market and skills policy from a federal and provincial level are in sync. We don't want to have all this investment and then not be able to follow through and actually build the project. So, yeah, that would be my 20-second answer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Glover. Mr. Bryson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to each of you for appearing before us today. Mr. Smiley, recently I was at a conference. It was the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, and there was a session on education and training. And one of the Calgary-based oil executives or CEOs said that he felt he had just as much interest in the quality of trades training in Nova Scotia or Newfoundland as he did in Alberta because of the mobility of the workforce in Canada. Over the weekend, I was in Mr. Jean's riding of Fort McMurray, where there's a lot of Atlantic Canadians living and working. And one of the things I saw in that riding, when you talk to people, some of the training programs that enable people after grade 10 to go to a summer job and to do some form of apprenticeship after grade 11 and then grade 12, they actually graduate from high school with a skilled trades. My question is, given the diversity of practices within Canadian provinces around trades, do we really need a national trades and learning strategy, working with the provinces, but a robust strategy on learning in Canada?
I think we need a refocus, is what I would say. We have, in the skilled trades, we have the Red Seal program, which already is a national sort of forum, so to speak. What I would say is the federal government needs to take a look at when they're giving money to provinces for education programs and for training programs, they need to think about the public policy implications of that money, or is it just a carte blanche over to the provinces? So do we need a national strategy? I think what we need is national coordination to make sure that we can, he's looking at me funny, but we need coordination from the national level, which makes sure the right people are lined up with the right jobs at the right time.
Yeah. This is a longer discussion perhaps, but I would assert we actually need more than just coordination. I think this is a national imperative, and there's no constitutional barrier to leadership on this file, or preventing leadership on this file from the national level. On the issue of international students, both in terms of Canadian students studying abroad and foreign students studying here, Australia last year, for a long time Australia was attracting more students from China, but I believe last year Australia started attracting more students from Mexico than Canada. Is it a question of resources, or is the Australian government just more focused on this in terms of the amount of investment they're making? And would it be a good idea to develop some sort of national or international really recognized scholarship program aimed at attracting the best and brightest to Canada, something with a branding capacity of, say, a Fulbright or Rhodes Scholarship in time?
Absolutely. To the Australian question first, Australia is investing quite heavily in the branding of Australia as an education destination of choice. And the advisory panel on international education in Canada advised that if we did a similar thing to that, we could double the number of international students by 2022 from the 239,000 to roughly 450. On the Fulbright scholarship idea, again, the recommendation that we make is for a doubling of the number of scholarships for study abroad opportunities as well as studying in Canada. On study abroad, we want to see 50,000 Canadians having the opportunity to study abroad and certainly the same number having scholarships to study in Canada.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lowndes, congratulations on the work that Nature Conservancy Canada is doing, and I support what you're calling for in terms of continuing the NACP. Have you looked at issues around land banking and around agriculture and sensitive agricultural land as one of the issues? That's something that we're seeing more, for instance, in the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia with the pressures of development. Have you taken a look at some models around that?
Just a brief response, please.
Sorry?
A brief response.
Okay. No, we haven't been looking at that. That's not something our group has particular expertise in. We focus on the biodiversity conservation question. There are, though, many more regional land trusts that have been established that are working and looking at agricultural land conservation.
Would not be
no, it is not to this point in time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bryson, we'll go to Mr. Preston. Mr. Chairman, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rajat. It's great to be here today. I'm going to go back to the Nature Conservancy, too, and maybe help with some of the answers Mr. Bryson was looking for. But again, thank you for your opening statement. Thank you for the work you do. You're doing a great job protecting some of the ecologically sensitive lands in Canada. But more so, thank you for page number 3 in your brochure. It's fantastic. We'll let others look that one up. I understand that the Nature Conservancy partners with land trusts, for the most part, in order to acquire land from landowners, ecologically sensitive lands from landowners. And those land trusts leverage matching federal funds in order to be able to do that. The Land Trust Alliance, or the Canadian Land Trust Alliance, is asking for a change in the, how do we call it, the carry forward provision from a taxing point of view, from a tax point of view, to an increase to 10 years from 5 years on the carry forward provision for that. First of all, how important is it to if you will, the carry forward provision in the acquiring or land for land trusts in order to be able to acquire this type of land?
You're speaking about the carry forward in terms of the how long you can utilize an eco gift,
right? Exactly.
In terms of your individual tax. We haven't found it to be necessarily a major problem. It would be helpful if you're able to do that, obviously, because it would make a lot of the folks who we run into often who are what I'd call land rich, cash poor,
right.
And they're the folks that more often than not can benefit from some more innovative ways of looking at how we treat their particular tax situation. Because often, what we're able to bring to the table is this is kind of like a P3 for conservation is what we're doing,
exactly.
And we're just trying to figure out what's the proper investment of public dollars versus private dollars versus what the landowner themselves may contribute to the equation.
Well, and you bring forward that P3 piece, the public, but you leverage the federal dollars in all of these things with private dollars and land trust dollars coming forward in order to help that. How important is it encouraging the awareness of a credit like that in order to generate, as you mentioned it, the land rich, cash poor kind of situation?
Yeah, the actual both the dollars and the credits available are very important to why people participate in a program like this. And if you think about land and land conservation, really there's both private benefits that are being received from the land. There's also public benefits that are being received from the land. So that's why we believe at the Nature Conservancy this is something that we have to figure out how we are all working on it.
Right. So any idea what the cost would be, the difference between a 5-year and a 10-year? Or have you done, no?
I haven't looked at it, sorry.
Okay, great. In your submission, it says, we're proud of our history of leveraging private sector investment to protect Canada's natural spaces and promote conservation. We already talked about how much is truly leveraged of federal dollars into doing it. You're really good at this. You're actually quite good from the land trust point of view.
Thank you.
Of convincing the private sector to get involved in setting aside ecologically sensitive lands, and your group helps organize that. You're quite successful at doing it. Do you have any thoughts for some of the other sectors and how they could also be doing some of this leveraging of private? I mean, Mr. Smiley mentioned about the leveraging of private-public partnerships, but this is, you're really quite good at it as an organization of convincing people to do it.
Well, and part of it is not just convincing people to do it. What we found is that there is, if you scratch people just a little bit, you'll find there's a lot of people who are actually quite keen about conservation underneath all the other things they do. And so what we've been finding over the past decade or so is there's more and more folks that have become interested in not only saying they're interested in conservation, but actually kind of putting their money where their mouth is. And by having ways to incent them to do that, that has really basically changed how we're able to make that happen. So, I mean, it may be something, I'm not an expert in that, but it may be something to look at in terms of how other sectors may be able to drive forward what I'd consider to be good public policy and great agendas.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Preston. Monsieur Caron, s'il vous plaît, pour 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank our various witnesses as well. I'd like to continue put a question to Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips, first of all, in the agricultural field, I imagine grain growers in particular, we find ourselves with a situation where family farms compete with can you tell us what the situation is with family farms at the present time when it comes to the production of grain at the present time?
Over 90% of all farms in Canada are still controlled by families, such as my family and my father's family. And only, I think it's only 5 or 10% would be considered corporate control. When people say corporate farms, sometimes they, like my farm is not large, it's still a corporation just because it's easier to give my wife some shares and each of my 4 sons some shares. So just because farms are corporate doesn't mean they're what some people would call corporate farms. Yeah.
Merci.
Thank you. Would you be in a position, I think that the distinction is important. It's not so much large and small farms. I'm talking about large farmers. Can you tell us whether these farms constitute a threat to family farms at the present time?
Larger in Western Canada. Part of that is just the technology and the machinery we have available to where one farmer on a tractor today can farm far more acres than what they used to. So part of it, I think, is just a natural evolution. When I look around my hometown, there are fewer farmers, but the people that are there are actually better farmers in many ways. I went through university, but the young people coming after me today are smarter, faster, and brighter than I was at that age. And so I think some of it's just a natural progression. They're capable of farming more land.
Okay, merci.
Thank you. In your submission, you refer to the fact that Canadian farmers are getting older. And, of course, this means that at one point there's going to be a question of transfer. In the field of agriculture, there may be certain obstacles for the transfer of family farms, and I suppose that this is the case in the production of grains as well. Can you define what these obstacles are at the present time, and can you suggest any possible solutions in an attempt to deal with them?
young people to want to farm is to make a lot of money. And right now, I'll be frank, we are seeing a lot of young people wanting to come back and take over the family farms because it's profitable. Something you might want to consider is the capital gains exemption. So if a farmer retires from farming, he gets, is it $500,000 or $750,000? I can't remember. There's a number in there. So if my father sells his farm, he can save some tax-free. But it's not actually tied to selling it to your own family. And so you may want to look at, would you provide an additional exemption if you're to sell your farm so that you can transfer your assets to your children without having to pay a lot of income tax? In theory, then you can transfer at a lower value to give them a better start. Something like that, I think, would be very worthwhile looking at.
Merci. Une autre question.
Thank you. I have another question. In Bill C-38, the previous bill, there was a provision that was adopted to privatize the process for the inspection of seeds. A number of farmers in my constituency were worried about the fact that this might jeopardize the credibility of the inspection in relation to our trading partners in countries where we export to. Can you tell us whether this is a concern that you have heard about, whether it's been expressed by your organization?
I myself am a seed grower for over 20 years, and my father was a seed grower and my grandfather was a seed grower as well. And so we were initially concerned about that. I think we've communicated very clearly, though, to the government and the people responsible, if you're not going to actually do it, whoever we license to do it, you have to watch them and make sure they're well qualified to do the job. So as long as the people are qualified and they follow up and spot check them, then I think we'll be okay. But that's really critical that good people get put into the positions. Otherwise, we'd be better off leaving it with the government.
Merci. 30 secondes. Mais en fait, juste une confirmation.
This is simply a confirmation, so it's too early for us to determine what the results of this process are and whether it's been successful or not.
It comes into effect next year.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Merci, Mr. Caron. Mr. Jean, please.
Chair, and thank you to the witnesses who attended today. Mr. McAlpine, I'm interested. I was a international student. I went to Portland, Oregon, and did a science degree, and went to Australia and did a law degree, and as well as an MBA. And I have to tell you, what attracted me to Australia was the sun, not necessarily the great education. However, I didn't get to see much of it. I did spend a lot of time indoors in classrooms. But I'm curious. I know Australia has a huge program for international students. In fact, Bond University, where I attended at the time, back in the late 80s, early 90s, was 40% international students. And the makeup of that was about, I would say, 35 to 36% was probably students from Asia, because, of course, they're natural trading partners in Asia. A lot of Indians there as well, because of the trade and also because of the proximity. I mean, they have 3 billion people on their doorstep that they do business with. So don't you see that as more of a, I'm just for a single answer, don't you see that as more of a natural reason why Australia, with the same per capita, in essence, for landmass, has, in essence, a lot more foreign students?
No, not necessarily. Certainly, Australia has the proximity to high population areas that Canada doesn't. That being said, Australia is also investing very substantially in international education, and they have far fewer universities than Canada does. They have targeted international education as a economic driver, as well as potentially a solution to their demographic crisis, hoping that the international students will come to Australia, experience the sun, and stay.
And in fact, that's what's happening. Most of them, I know, going through my MBA with many Asian students there, they looked at that as a stepping stone to get into, in essence, a Commonwealth country. Australia, Canada, the U.S., they looked at going to Australia as an opportunity to go into another country in a job, because they said that if they do well here, the opportunity to move forward into another area of the world is very good.
Absolutely, and as a Commonwealth country, Canada could become more and more of a stepping stone for individuals wishing to emigrate into the developed countries, into the West.
Now, of course, our jurisdictional issues are different than they are constitutionally bound to what we have, and we have here in Canada. The provinces are ultimately responsible for administering education. What role do you see that provinces could do? Because I know, as myself, I came back with a law degree. I wasn't able to practice until I went to the U of C for a period of time. Do you see that interrelationship, that provinces should get on the bandwagon on this? I know they're very competitive, province to province and school to school, for international students, because I think they pay somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $45,000 per year, depending on discipline. I know it's quite expensive. So it's a very competitive process. Do you see that they could work together to bind a Canada-wide solution strategy instead of a competitive one?
Absolutely, and that is in fact what CBIE as well as the task force are recommending, is a national branding strategy. Imagine Canada is the education brand that we have, and expansion of that. We're working very closely with CMEC, Council of Ministers of Education Canada, as well as with DFATE and other bodies. I think there is a real appetite for cooperation rather than competition, because really the dominant factor is the country, not the province. So
I understand.
Yep.
Of course, there are jurisdictional issues there, as I said. But,
yep.
Did you say 33% of Germans travel abroad, or that 33% is what Germans make up of international students?
33% of German students are in exchange programs abroad.
I do want to move to Mr. Smiley just for a moment. Mr. Smiley, I am from Fort McMurray, and I have to tell you that what they reimburse is not $120. It's about $180 a day now, and that's what it costs to house these people at camps including swimming pools, weight rooms, massage therapists, and all the rest. So it's not really a camp. But I really like your idea, and I've been advocating since 2005 for a tax credit on travel and mobility. And do you see, and I only have about 30 seconds left, but do you see the partnership that Keano College, for instance, in Fort McMurray, Portage College in Lac La Biche, and others across northern Alberta have done in the last 2 years or 3 years of high school, training people, as a model that we could take across the country to make sure that the trade colleges in Newfoundland or Labrador or Nova Scotia are training people in partnership to work these jobs that we're going to need in every part of the country sooner or later, across the north, Quebec, Maritimes, etc. Do you see that opportunity?
So any unique way or any better way to train more workers and get them on the job faster is something that adds value. If Keano College is doing something and it works in Alberta, let's do it in Newfoundland. Pretty soon Newfoundland and Alberta are going to be competing for each other's workers with some of the offshore and the lower Churchill, et cetera. So anything we can do, whoever's delivering provincial curriculums, be it community colleges, be it private organizations, be it unions, be it whatever, let's make sure we can get as many people trained as possible for the crunch that's coming.
And I would encourage your organization to get involved with that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jean. I always thought you moved to Australia to become a professional surfer. That's what you told me. We'll go, Monsieur Maille, s'il vous plaît, pour 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to welcome the witnesses and thank them for coming here. Mr. Lowndes, with respect to your position, I wanted to understand, you are part of the Green Budget Coalition as well, are you? And are you in agreement with the principles set out by this coalition?
We're a member of the Green Budget Coalition, and every year there are proposals that are prepared by the Green Budget Coalition and presented to the committees and various others. That said, the coalition also, as each individual group, do present their own interest areas, and so that's why the Nature Conservancy itself's expertise focuses on land conservation.
And the
Actually, we're proposing a cap-and-trade system. Is it something that you would support also?
That's not an area of expertise that our particular group has, so I wouldn't be able to speak to that.
Okay.
But we're an on-the-ground conservation services organization, so it's basically we focus in on what can we achieve for habitat conservation, and that's basically what we do.
But in terms of conservation, I saw that on your website there are benefits for credits in terms of carbon capture, the fact that some of the land that you have will actually provide some credits, and I think I read something like $40 million that were already part of a a system. Can you maybe expand more on that too?
Yeah, as a pilot project, we've taken a look at is this an area, because as you may know, in British Columbia there's a system for carbon credits, and we took a look at, is there something here that can help with providing funds for the ongoing stewardship of lands? It's not only the cost of acquiring properties that's important, but you have to take care of them over the long term. And so that was something that we've taken a look at. We're currently taking an examination of that to make sure that this is something that actually can work. I know that there's lots of discussion going on both internationally and provincially and elsewhere about what's the what are the standards under which these things can operate. So that's it's an area of interest that we're looking at, but we're approaching that from the actual practical. If people out there are interested in this, how can that then benefit getting great conservation work done on the ground? And obviously, the carbon needs to be sequestered in the forest, etc.
Thank you very much. For the Board of Trade, there talk about infrastructure, obviously investment, something to have stable. Is what the government has done so far, is it sufficient, or is it something that you want more in terms of, let's say, for instance, the transfer of the gas tax, in terms of transferring in a more stable fund that will allow infrastructure investment, something that you would push for?
Sure. So the infrastructure stimulus fund, which moved us through the recession, absolutely kept people working in the thousands. We work with the Canadian Federation of Municipalities.
Yep.
At the end of the day, I think municipalities, provinces, and the federal government have a vested interest in planning for the future, so that we're not, when we have money available, just like the infrastructure stimulus fund, we're not scrambling around trying to find projects to build. The small municipality, for instance, might not have had anything in the hopper, so to speak, because they could never dream that they would have the kinds of funds that were available. So, similar to the FCM, we would say there has to be something that's stable. It also allows skilled trades workers to go to work on a consistent basis. If you have municipalities upgrading their water systems, upgrading transit, upgrading other infrastructure, it means construction companies are bidding on that stuff, and it means that people in everyone's ridings are going to work on a regular basis. So there's value in planning ahead. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not a funding formula expert, but what we do know is that when we're labor force planning, it's
just quickly, I saw in your brief you said that you support Bill C-201, which is Chris Charlton. Can you maybe quickly just give us a note on that? So
Chris Charlton introduced this bill, I want to say maybe 8-9 years ago, as a way to get the discussion going on mobility. It currently is in the mix in terms of private members' business. She's told me that if the government decides to put some stuff in spirit in her bill into a budget, she'd gladly withdraw it. It's not a partisan issue. It's to get discussion going about mobility in the skilled trades.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur Mai. We'll go to Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Chair, thank you all for being here. What an excellent panel, too. I think there's so many questions that I could ask, and I do want to go to you, Mr. Liss, though. You talked about a data infrastructure program. It sounds like it's similar to the knowledge infrastructure program our government has introduced. Can you explain a little bit more how it would work? Would you suppose that it would be a temporary funding as opposed to long measure? What would be the cost, and have you got any ideas where we could pull the funds from? Have you thought about that as well, too?
Well, thank you for the question. It's certainly, I think, a particularly important point with respect to where the future lies around data. So the government makes significant investments in infrastructure to support data computing analytics. And there's no doubt that ongoing need to refresh and renew that is a subject of great concern and advocacy through competitive funding programs that currently exist. What is really primarily, I think most importantly needed, is a national framework to support a system. And it really is about an integration of all the pieces of a rather large landscape of various different parts and bits that aren't all what I would think arguably well connected and integrated. So, for example, talking to the Minister of Environment and Science in Northwest Territories and about the sheer volume of data and information that's so relevant to the economic and socioeconomic conditions, extractive industries, climate change, and so forth. We're drinking at the fire hose, and they're looking to support across Canada for using that data for all sorts of policy and economic development purposes. We have a similar scenario unfolding across the country, as well as the need to be much more globally connected with respect to our data and access to that data internationally. And so it's really about a system to understand how to best to integrate and effectively use our resources that we do make investments in more efficiently and more effectively.
You talked about building partnerships. And you've identified the small and the medium-sized businesses. You know that our government is very supportive of public-private partnerships. Can you go into more detail into how these have been established and the results you've seen, and how successful they've been, and how can we get SMEs and private sector more involved in these types of partnerships?
Well, you're beginning to see some of this unfolding with respect to data and analytics, with respect to the investments like large companies like IBM have been making to support innovative research, but encouraging the technology development that they're investing in to support and connect to small to medium-sized enterprises to be able to access the type of infrastructure. So that's one illustration. I think the investments that have come through FedDev, it's in Ontario, the Centers of Excellence in Commercialization and Research, and many examples of innovation that's taking place across Canada with respect to partnerships between and access to infrastructure in post-secondary institutions, both in colleges and universities, and also the mobility of young people between the respective institutions and organizations. And in that context, that's an area where I think Canada really isn't as well positioned with respect to the porosity of our organizations and movement of people between educational institutions, industry, and government. The other thing to keep in mind is that the average age of an entrepreneur in the United States, or if we want to look at that as a model, is 39 years of age. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot learned, and in, that between the time somebody exits, let's say, some formal schooling at post-secondary level and the time they become an entrepreneur. And I look at what is happening now with respect to innovative programs and entrepreneurship to get young people more engaged and more involved and aware of the opportunities. But there are some gaps with respect to available capital in Canada and an entrepreneurial spirit that is limited by that available resource and risk that is often seen to be a very high price to pay for entrepreneurship in this country.
I only have a few seconds. I want to ask you, you mentioned about 39 years being the average age in the United States. What is it in Canada, do you know?
I would suspect it's probably similar as well, but it does speak to the fact that it doesn't happen really out of school, and we do have to have the right environment that encourages the type of experiences and the environment that gets people to evolve to become the types of entrepreneurs by that age.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Van Kesteren, Mr. Marston, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Cohen, I had originally planned on starting with someone else, but your presentation caught me. In my family, we've dealt with postpartum depression. We dealt with schizophrenia. We had one family member that was medicated and hospitalized on and off for 50 years. And what comes out of that is the awareness of the many places that there's a shortfall in the system. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we're not in the blame game. I would just ask the members opposite to please give particular consideration to this presentation. I'm not going to ask you a question because it was comprehensive in what you delivered to us. Your needs are well laid out, and I just ask the members opposite to please take the time to look at that. Mr. Smiley, the Ontario Training and Adjustment Board, did you ever work with them?
The Ontario Training and Adjustment Board. never.
Where are you from, sir? I'm sorry.
I'm from, well, I live in Ottawa now, but I'm
Live in Ottawa.
from Oakville
During
originally.
the 90s, we had the Ontario Training and Adjustment Board. It was a facility put together by an NDP government and worked with the federal government of the day to start laying plans for retraining of workers. And it was a model that we thought was really exceptional. And there was changes made in it when there was a change of government in Ontario. But it was a model, I think, that could be revisited here. So, but if you've not worked with it, I'll move on to talk to you about the current reliance on temporary workers. We've got a situation where there's several hundred thousand temporary foreign workers being brought into the country. How is that affecting your members' ability to do their jobs?
So I'll speak to the skilled trades. I can't speak to some of the other sectors. In our slice of the economy, the temporary foreign worker program is used effectively as a complementary HR tool. There are situations where people are brought in from all around the world to work on construction sites. But at the end of the day, in construction, the numbers are, I think last year there was 4,600 in our trades. And we, it's an economy with about 1.5 million workers in it. So in the trades that we represent, the skilled trades, really the top source country for these people has been the United States. And so far the experience with the temporary foreign workers, so to speak, from the U.S. has been good. They're trained just like us. They speak
More
our language.
The skill level you're talking about.
So it's tough in our trades because it is highly specialized, and these folks only exist in a few places in the world.
One of the things when Ms. Glover was speaking to you, it was evident the cooperation that goes back and forth between the building trades and the government.
Yeah.
And in light of Bill C-377, it wasn't an awkward moment, but it was a little bit on the surprising side because we've heard so much negativity here from the government side relative to unions and that. When we have been studying C-377, what was your reaction? When you first come in here, you made the point of your members being voluntary, and I thought that was very important.
So at the end of the day, I had a bad dream that I said bad things about 377 today. At the end of the day, the partnership that we have in place with the Government of Canada on things like helmets to hard hats, things with Minister Flaherty, things with Minister Finlay, Minister Oliver, et cetera, are based on a sort of an earned friendship. So the 377 stuff, well, you can read our testimony from October 25th in terms of where we are with that. But I want to make sure that we don't get bogged down in that stuff, and that we make sure that the budget focuses on skill policy.
Well, that was my point.
We are stretching relevance to the maximum.
But that cooperation was the important part I wanted to make. Thank you.
You've got about 30 seconds.
Do I? Well, Mr. McAlpine, in 30 seconds, sir, we've had foreign workers raised here, and it strikes me as logical to try and retain the foreign students that we have in this country as citizens.
Absolutely.
And do you believe that our government should be given serious consideration to increasing its investment in international education with an eye on doing just that?
Precisely. We have fairly good data and fairly robust data that about 50% of the international students wish to stay in Canada, and this speaks to some policy around the Canadian experience class. And what we really need to do is to develop ways to meet our targets in the CEC class of immigration.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Marston. Mr. Hoback, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just get the right mic here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see you here, and I appreciate your testimony here this afternoon. It's very interesting. Unfortunately, I only get 5 minutes, so I'm going to maybe go with Mr. Phillips here and talk a little bit about the grain sector and the grains and oilseed sector. I know, Mr. Phillips, you were a seed grower, you mentioned here in previous testimony, so you may have seen $10 wheat in your days growing seed, but I was kind of curious, how many times have you seen $8.50, $9 off the combine in wheat prices in your growing career?
Once.
And that would be just happen to be this year?
Yes.
It's very interesting. And then you talked about changes to the Canadian Wheat Board. just kind of curious, again, and we've made changes. There are a lot of things put in place to support the Canadian Wheat Board, whether it's the grain grading system, whether it's the transportation system. We made some changes in the Budget Implementation Act that went through this committee. I was just kind of curious, you talked about further changes. What types of changes do you see that we need to be looking at, whether it be in the grading or what areas?
There's a couple things that we need. Number one is there's a lot of cost in running the Canadian Grain Commission, and so if we're paying even $2 a ton more than what we need to be for that, on a 50,000-ton vessel, that's $100,000 on every single boatload of grain that leaves Canada. And we export millions of tons. These big numbers. So we need to go through the Canadian Grain Commission. Inward inspection is going away, but we need to go through and say what else have they got their fingers into over the years, what adds value to farmers and what doesn't add value to farmers. Because at the end of the day, when we move to cost recovery, farmers will pay 100% of the cost of the operations there. And so we need some sort of mechanism of governance so that we can make sure that what they're doing returns value back to us. And then we're happy to pay for it. So that's one of the things. The other one is we see a huge interest in people wanting to come in and invest in wheat breeding in Canada. Canola is a huge success story. The acres have gone up, the yields have gone up, the wealth back to farmers have gone up because the private and public and producers have all worked together. In wheat, we never had that. We now have that opportunity, so we need to have a system that will ensure that the private sector comes in and we can leverage their money along with Agriculture Canada, universities, and producers can come to the table with money too. We have to build that partnership. And for that, they need more surety that if they invest in research, the varieties will actually get registered for sale. And right now, the variety registration system does not provide that confidence to any private breeders at all.
So again, I know the varietal registration system in the Ag Committee, we've seen a lot of issues there in the process. I know a lot of our winter wheat varieties, for example, are more accepted in the U.S. and have sold in the U.S. than they were in Canada, which was disappointing when you looked at the economic benefit those varieties would have brought to our farmers. You also touched upon level rail service and the importance of just-in-time delivery and actually being able to meet commitments. What type of changes do you see that we need to have in the rail system to create some accountability? What would you suggest in that area?
Well, two things right off the top of the mind is I think we need some sort of reciprocal penalties. Right now, all the penalties are if you don't load your rail car on time or if you overload at one end of it too much, there's big penalties applied to all the shippers. If the cars don't show up within even a week of when they're supposed to show up, there's no penalties for the railways. And so how that affects the actual grassroots farmers is if you're trying to bid and sell grain into Turkey on a lentil contract, for example, you're saying, well, what are the odds I'll actually get my rail cars on time to get it to Montreal or to Thunder Bay to get it over there? And what are the penalties going to be? Because you're going to have to start pay less money to the farmers to allow for the likely penalties you're going to have for late delivery. And that all comes directly out of the farmers' pockets. So we need reciprocal penalties to help ensure better service, and we also need a fair arbitration and dispute resolution process that when there are disputes, we don't have to go through the over $1 million in a level of service complaint that we have to today with the Canada Transportation Act. It's just small shippers can't do it, so we simply lose out on sales from Canada.
Okay, and then I guess finally, Mr. Phillips, I know before you talked about public research and have research dollars available for plant breeding. I'll use plant breeding as an example, talking to some farmers in Ontario. They're looking for a winter wheat breeder to be located here in Ontario. What do you think we need to be doing as far as the government, as far as plant breeding, and how do we make that work with the private sector so that they're not necessarily competing one against the other?
Okay, just a brief response, please.
Okay, everything we have today is predicated on, primarily predicated on having the wheat board involved. I think we have to sit down and look at how are we using our cluster money, our DIAP money. I think we could review all that. We've had several years' experience. I think the Ontario guys have great ideas as well. But the private sector's got a lot of money willing to put into this. We just need to find a way to lever it to make use of it.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hoback. Ms. McLeod, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. Again, a great diversity of presentation. And I think being as my colleague right beside me was pointing out page 3, I do have to point out page 2 in the Nature Conservancy website as being a project that I'm particularly fond of. And maybe if I have time at the end, we could perhaps have a bit of opportunity to talk a little bit about how that really matches together and moves forward a win-win, I think. I would like to start with some specific questions to Ms. Cohen. And I guess for me, I came from one system where certainly people could access physiotherapists, they could access psychologists through extended health benefits without a doctor referral. And then I, of course, notice in the federal system it's very different. Now, intuitively to me, we know that we have busy physicians, and I think, people are capable of recognizing sometimes what is their appropriate path into support. Has there been any research looking at sort of appropriateness of access, costs of one system versus the other? Because I think we have an opportunity there to really say what is the better system. We need people to get help when they need it. So has there been any work done in that area?
Well, certainly psychologists have, by legislation, it varies a bit from province to province, but by legislation have the authority to diagnose and deliver care. So if someone decides to seek the services of a psychologist outside of a publicly funded system, of course, they go straight there. And the issue becomes when they want to get reimbursed by their extended health care plans. And there's great variability. Some underwriters will require a physician referral, some will not. This work that I mentioned that we're commissioning, one part of it will be our surveys of stakeholders, including the insurance industry. So I can't give you any data about the differences in uptake when the bottleneck is created, but certainly it's happening. It creates an unnecessary delay because the work that's going to be done is going to be done by the psychologist.
I'd be really curious. I wonder if anyone would ever take up that particular task in terms of studying one system versus the other. I mean, if you think of the costs with a physician visit, again, they perhaps would argue, so it would be a fascinating piece of work because I think we have a natural opportunity. But again, to me, it seems a fairly sensible that many people, again, know when a psychologist or a physiotherapist might be their avenue of support that they need. The next question I wanted to ask you is, can you expand a little bit further in terms of, you were talking residency training within the federal system. Can you talk a little bit about what you envision there?
Yeah. One of the great challenges around recruitment and retention are, there's several, but one of them is training, so that we've heard recently how Canadian Forces, Veterans Affairs has a need for psychologists, Correctional Services has a need for psychologists. What we know, and we've sort of heard that from other of the panelists, that students tend to stay where they train, and also where the need is, has to participate in the development of that skill set that they need to work in that particular environment. So if a psychologist has a PhD in clinical psychology, they also need to know something about the forces in order to work with that population. So by creating those residency programs, you contribute to training, and you also provide a mechanism for recruitment and retention. There's a program in Winnipeg, in fact, that is a rural and northern program that trains psychologists to work in those communities. My understanding is that over 50% of their graduates actually stayed to work in rural and northern venues.
So within the federal public service right now, there is no residency programs at all?
As far as I know, one has recently been developed in Corrections and Correctional Services Canada. We've been trying to advocate for the development of a residency program that might see clinical psychology students rotating through various departments, perhaps 4 months in Veterans Affairs, 4 months in the Canadian Forces and Correctional Services, to help try to meet that resource need.
Okay. And are you training enough psychologists right now that would meet the needs anyway, or is there a significant shortage of
That's a really good question. The only benchmarks that I'm aware of is one within the area of school psychology, and we know that the greatest return on investment when it comes to mental health is with children. Benchmarks about 1 psychologist for every 1,000 students. The European Federation of Psychologists suggests it should be 1 to about 1,500. In Canada, it really is all over the map. Half the psychologists in the country are in Quebec, which is interesting. And in the rest of the jurisdictions, it's 1 to several thousands, 3,000 to 4,000. Rural, remote, it's about 28,000. So are there enough psychologists? Well, I guess my answer to that is, 1, I'm not sure we have a clear benchmark in Canada, but 2, we do know that we're the largest group, where there are 4 times as many psychologists as psychiatrists who are licensed to practice. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McLeod. We're almost out of time. I don't have time for a full round, but I did want to just ask one question. Mr. Lowndes, your presentation here is very interesting in terms of what you've accomplished as an organization. Do you have a sense as to what impact the set-aside of these lands in particular has had on carbon emissions? I mean, people talk about sort of one half of the carbon cycle. We often don't talk about the other in terms of absorption. Do you have any sense of that as an organization, what sort of an impact it had?
We wouldn't have a sense of what it would be in terms of a calculation. I mean, clearly all growing material sequesters carbon. And the more that happens, you will end up with that, except for all the buffer you have to build into it with regard to disease, fire, et cetera, that may impact upon it. So that's why we've been experimenting to look at in more detail what exactly that looks like in one particular forest that we have in British Columbia. And we'll have to see how that goes. It's not a very simple thing to be calculated.
I can imagine that, but I would encourage you as an organization to have something, even a ballpark figure you could present.
Yeah, what we have found, I mean, the 3,200 square kilometers, people, to give that a sense of size, that actually is about more than 4 times the currently mined oil sands area in northern Alberta. So it's not an insubstantial amount of land that's getting conserved, and I think if we can figure out how to both develop our economy and put forward conservation measures at the same time, then we're off to the races.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to continue this discussion. It's been a very good one, but I do have to unfortunately end our panel here. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being with us here this afternoon, and thank you for your presentations, your responses to our questions. Colleagues will we'll suspend for a couple minutes and bring the next panel forward. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call this meeting back to order. I encourage colleagues to find their seats, please. We are continuing our discussion of pre-budget consultations 2012 pursuant to Standing Order 83.1. This is the 92nd meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. This is our second panel today. We have 5 organizations presenting. First of all, the Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada. We have secondly the Canadian Climate Forum. Thirdly, we have the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research. Fourth, we have the Canadian Restaurant and Food Services Association. And fifth, we have the Retail Council of Canada. You each have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and we will begin with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada and work our way down the line, please. Please begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel. I'm with Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada, and I'm very grateful to be speaking here today. Canada is facing an unprecedented demographic shift that will require its young people to be educated, skilled, and able to enter the workforce. The country's economic recovery and growth depends in part on its workforce and on young Canadians' ability to do their part. We know Canada's youth have great potential, but some of them struggle to achieve that potential because they lack the services and supportive relationships that would make the difference between the street and a job, between dropping out or pursuing post-secondary education, and between the job they can get and the job that will inspire them to give their best. No single measure will prepare young people to succeed in school and enter the workforce, but quality after-school programs are part of the solution. Such programs improve school outcomes, help young people build job skills, expand social networks, and gain the experience they need to enter a competitive job market. Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada are leading providers of quality after-school programs that support the healthy physical, mental, educational, and social development of children. Our association of 100 clubs reach some 200,000 children, youth, and families each year in 650 community locations across Canada. And low-income families represent 60% of those we serve. Clubs are located in neighborhoods where we're most needed, including large city centres, suburbs, remote rural communities, and First Nations reserves. And Boys and Girls Clubs are a safe and supportive place to be. When you speak with Cornwall Community Police Chief Daniel Parkinson, he'll tell you that crime has gone down 40% as a result of the Boys and Girls Club's presence in the community. Young people have access to more recreation programs, support to succeed in school, leadership, employment opportunities, and that has made all the difference. Twice now, the Cornwall Club has partnered to run the Skills Link program for young people, for local youth. At the national level, Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada is working with the private sector to invest in our young people's success. In partnership with Cal Tire, we're helping address the skilled trades shortages. Skilled for Success program offers on-site job shadowing, connections to community members working in the trades, career planning information, and support in pursuing a certified apprenticeship. 12 Boys and Girls Clubs across the country are offering the program in this first year of our partnership. And we want young people to succeed, and we're engaging with government and the private sector to make this happen. Our full recommendations are in the brief that we've submitted to the committee, but I'd like to highlight a few here. We want to underline the importance of Canada's youth employment strategy. Programs such as Career Focus, Skills Link, Canada Summer Jobs enable clubs to provide youth with valuable work experience. The Skills Link program is especially relevant to clubs because it promotes the human capital and employability of a population that faces many barriers to employment. We would see great benefit in enhancing this program. Youth who struggle with mental health problems and illnesses need extra support. We encourage the government to help create opportunities for these youth to work in a supportive environment, thus ensuring they have a strong start in the workforce and that they increase their labour market participation. A program similar to Skills Link, offered to organizations and businesses that can provide a supportive workplace, would be extremely valuable. We also need to make sure that young people stay on a positive life path, and a criminal record can be a real barrier in a young person's prime earning years. And it's incumbent on us to ensure that few young people see crime as a viable option. We urge you to enhance the funding to the Youth Justice Fund and the Youth Gang Prevention Fund, and ensure that employment opportunities are part of gang prevention efforts. We also ask you to bolster the National Crime Prevention Strategy to help communities reach young people before they enter the justice system.
1 minute.
Increased funding on its own won't be enough. It takes years to build the kinds of relationships that will save a youngest person's life and make the difference between them choosing the street or the Skills Link program at their local club. Programs that are achieving results in communities that need them should be able to access longer-term funding. We hope to see a change in policy that will allow long-term and stable investments in demonstrated results. And we understand that motion 407 presented by the MP for Surrey North is an effort in this direction. There's much we can do to ensure Canada's young people succeed, enter the workforce, and contribute to the economy. Communities, nonprofit organizations, the private sector, government all have a role to play in securing a prosperous and enriching future for all of our young people and for all Canadians. And together we can make a little more investment with a long-term view go a long way towards that goal. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Canadian Climate Forum, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to make a presentation, and I'm really speaking to the brief we've submitted. The Canadian Climate Forum is a non-governmental organization dedicated to accelerating the uptake and use of knowledge about Canada's weather and climate systems as they are now and as they will be in the future. This is for the benefit of our economic and social societies and structures, and also, as I said, for the benefit of our children and grandchildren of the future, because the climate or weather will affect them now and through the course of their lives. We've seen in very recent events the impact of such, for example, Hurricane Sandy just 3 weeks ago, and the impacts on people, children, and the elderly in the United States. These kind of events have huge economic and social implications, $50 billion estimated so far for Hurricane Sandy. We've had those kind of events in Canada. The Canadian insurance corporations collectively note that in 2011 they spent $1.7 billion of payouts to compensate people for wind, rain, water, climate-related disasters. In the early part of this past decade, the cost of the droughts on the Canadian prairies to the grain growers and other parts of our agriculture community were in excess of $5 billion. The Montreal ice storm cost us over $5 billion when it happened. We need to know about these events, how they are happening, how they are changing in the future, and in that way to be able to provide, let's say, more information for Canadians, more information for the economic parts of Canada's economy. The estimate is that the Canadian weather-dependent industries exceed on their annual basis of over $100 billion a year in activities. And when you think of it as a natural resources-based economy, we are really based on our weather and climate. I've spent all of my professional life studying weather and climate, and I know how the trees, the nature conservatories, those kind of things, they depend on where the climate is and how it is and how the weather affects them. Smog is another issue. Canadian Medical Association has estimated in the literally billions of dollars. Their last numbers I saw were huge amounts, $250 billion of cost by 2030 in terms of the smog effects on the health of Canadians, including our veterans who have gone through a long part of their life. It will affect mostly the elderly and mostly the young. So we need to know about these kind of things, and research has told us generally what to expect. It can provide us with better information in the future. We just need to continue to support that kind of information. There was a question earlier from one of the distinguished members of this committee about carbon emissions from forests. The Canadian Carbon Network, previously supported by research funds, actually provided those numbers, and if I'd known that was going to be a question, I would have given you the answer, but I can't off the top of my head. But we know through basis of research pretty well how much does come in and out of our natural forest ecosystems in Canada. So, as I've said, we need to have a continued involvement in this issue. I will call for, as a recommendation from the Canadian Climate Forum, a policy focus on the potential impacts of weather, our day-to-day stuff, how it is changing, that's what we call climate, as development in key sectors, the economic development of the Arctic, for example, the energy sector, the need to adapt to weather and climate to reduce these impacts. There are benefits of a changing climate, but the agricultural community, for example, need to know what crop is going to grow next year. So we can, by knowing that, we can advise them. I've worked with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture through many meetings over the last decade, work with them on how we can better pick the crops that will grow most effectively 10 years from now as opposed to 10 years ago. So we need that solid and sustained investment in new knowledge, key facilities, knowledge workers, training the population through the Council of Ontario Universities was here before, but the universities from coast to coast to coast in Canada, including the high Arctic. We need to be able to use this information in ways that are effective, and in that way, information networks will be very important. So I think in recognition of the Canadian scientific brain power as an asset and commodity and importance, we should be working to foster partnerships, skills development, competitiveness, and international partnerships, and the Canadian Climate Forum would be happy to assist and play a role in these kind of activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McBean. We'll hear from Ms. Aitken now, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et membre du Comité permanent des finances.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Standing Committee.
Director of the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research, a professor at Queen's University, and a proud veteran of the Royal Canadian Navy. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Stephanie Belanger, the Associate Director, a professor at the Royal Military College, and an officer in the Reserve Force. The Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research, or CIMVHR, is a network of Canadian researchers from across the country who are committed strongly to working together to improve the health and employment outcomes of military personnel, veterans, and their families. We are proud to say that our network includes over 300 researchers and clinicians from over 25 universities across the country, and we are growing. We are here today to recommend that the Government of Canada invest in the work undertaken by our network. Mental and physical health challenges prevent many Canadians from participating fully in society and contributing to the economy. Veterans and their families are particularly vulnerable. The goal of CIMVHR is to optimize the potential of every one of the over 700,000 veterans living in Canada, and the evidence shows that this issue needs our focused attention. If we consider the number of people serving, those who have served, and their families, we are talking about 2 to 3 million Canadians who can be positively impacted by the work we are doing. Not to mention all the others in similar professions such as police, firefighters, paramedics, and their families. One major concern is that only 11% of Canadian veterans are clients of Veterans Affairs Canada, which means that almost 90% are part of a public health system that does not understand or address their particular needs. The researchers working through the CIMVHR network know that good health is critical to gaining productive employment. Working at the coalface between clinicians and researchers, CIMVHR provides a critical platform for ensuring that cutting-edge research is immediately translated into new policies, programs, and practices that improve the outcomes for veterans and their families. We also provide a much-needed platform for the coordination of researchers and health practitioners working in the area. For example, we've linked the sport concussion community together with defense scientists and practitioners working on blast injury so that they can find the best possible diagnosis and treatment techniques for traumatic brain injury. In fact, the Ontario Concussion Network will be presenting a special workshop on best practices for recognizing, diagnosing, and treating mild traumatic brain injury to military physicians at our upcoming conference, the Military and Veteran Health Research Forum, this November 26th to 28th. I am, as a researcher, working with a team of collaborators to get information about the unique needs of veterans into the hands of civilian family physicians so they can better understand this special population. We have the full support of the Canadian Medical Association and will be testing the methodology with 50,000 Canadian physicians in the new year. The veterans' health information will roll out by the end of 2013. We believe this has the capacity to immediately impact the health of hundreds of thousands of veterans. Dr. Belanger is the Canadian expert on testimony of war, and she is now working with a pan-Canadian team of mental health researchers to determine the parts of these stories that can give insight into the mental health needs of a soldier and how the healthcare community can best address these needs. These are only brief illustrations of the very important work that the CIMVHR network has embarked upon. Government support for the network is an excellent investment because it will directly impact the health and workforce productivity of Canadian veterans and their families. It will reduce the costs of health care insurance and benefits provided by VAC, and it will leverage, strengthen, and grow the impact of the work currently being undertaken by our national networkers of researchers and clinicians. We are asking for a very modest investment of $15 million over 5 years, and we will leverage this funding through public-private partnerships with industry, through Canadian philanthropic support, and by partnering with research funding organizations and our military allies. Of this money, 60% will go directly into funding new frontline research that will have an impact in a 1 to 5 year time frame. For example, new ways to diagnose and treat post-traumatic stress disorder, and 40% will go to support arm's-length research that validates the many programs, practices, and policies that have been implemented for these beneficiaries. At CIMVHR, we are committed to making a difference in the health and futures of our veterans and their families, diminishing the impact of combat-related stress, hastening recovery after injury, getting veterans into good jobs is our mission. With this investment, the government has the unprecedented chance to affect the lives of millions of Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll hear from Ms. Reynolds now, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to speak to you this afternoon on behalf of the $65 billion restaurant industry. The restaurant industry is the 4th largest private sector employer in Canada with 1.1 million employees. This is more than agriculture, forestry, automotive manufacturing, and mining, oil and gas extraction combined. Each one of these industries has been the focus of far more government resources and attention than the restaurant industry. Every $1 million in restaurant sales creates nearly 27 jobs, making our industry one of the top 5 job creators in the country. Every dollar spent at a restaurant generates an additional $1.85 in spending in the rest of the economy, well above the average for all industries in Canada. We indirectly employ over 250,000 Canadians. So far in 2012, the restaurant industry is one of the top 2 job creators in Canada, as net employment has risen already this year by 28,000 jobs. 1 in 5 Canadian youth between the ages of 15 and 24 work in restaurants. This represents more than 483,000 young people and accounts for more than 40% of the jobs in our industry. The restaurant industry is also the source of first job experience for 22% of Canadians, and nearly 1/3 of Canadians have worked in the industry at some point in their lives. Canadians operate restaurants in every corner of the country, from large centres to remote communities, and they continually demonstrate their innovation and drive. For government to focus primarily on industries in crisis or in need of subsidies and bailouts ignores a key group of entrepreneurs and a tremendous opportunity for the Canadian economy. Restaurants need a home in Ottawa. Currently, there is no government department responsible for the restaurant industry and no minister to champion the industry. Our primary ask today is the assignment of an assistant deputy minister to be responsible for our industry within a key department such as industry, and to ensure that there is a restaurant lens through which policy decisions are reviewed. So with the short time available to me, I want to key in on 3 issues, 2 that were in our submission that was submitted earlier this year. The first is the unfair tax treatment of restaurant meals. When the GST was first contemplated, the concept was to tax everything sold at the retail level without exemptions. A strong argument was made, however, that since food was essential, it should not be subject to GST. This seemingly reasonable compromise in 1991 has had unintended consequences over 20 years later. Deanne and I cooperate and agree on a lot of issues, but this is one where we have to agree to disagree. Her industry, the grocery sector, has capitalized on the GST exemption advantage by introducing thousands of new products, heat and eat versions of almost everything found on restaurant menus. Frozen meals processed offshore are tax-free, while meals prepared in restaurants by Canadians are taxed. The rules are arbitrary and they're confusing. Restaurants introduce Canadians to new cuisine, whether it's African or Thai or Indian, and once Canadians decide they like these items, then grocers come along and package them and sell them tax-free to Canadians. This loophole is unfair and it's hurting restaurants, and we are asking for the GST exemption for ready-to-heat meals to be removed. The second is I want to talk about modernizing our supply management system. The price of milk set by the Canadian Dairy Commission has climbed to unprecedented levels, resulting in cross-border runs on U.S. stores and milk and cheese smuggling operations. Currently, frozen pizza manufacturers are allowed to pay for Canadian mozzarella at U.S. market prices. Fresh pizza makers, who must pay up to 30% more for their mozzarella, are asking for a level playing field. CRFA is asking the federal government to modernize the supply management system so that it's not only hurting businesses and consumers, but it's also curtailing growth in the market for dairy and poultry products. We think we can help grow the dairy and poultry market in Canada. And finally, I'd like to focus on credit card fees. It wasn't originally in my submission, but with the Visa announcement recently that they're going to significantly increase their prices next year, as well as add another super premium card, it has our members really incensed. So I felt I needed to bring it to your attention today. I want to say, appreciate that government introduced and is now updating the Code of Conduct for credit and debit card companies in Canada. And while the Code of Conduct has prevented MasterCard and Visa from introducing reward-based debit cards with much higher fees, it has not curtailed the rising cost of credit card fees and the market share of high-cost premium credit cards that offer rewards to cardholders. The premium cards carry significantly higher fees that are charged to merchants, even though they see no increase in benefits. In some instances, the credit card can attract a different processing fee once it has been deemed high spend. Merchants are required, to accept all credit cards and cannot charge cardholders a fee to set up fee to offset any of these changes. As a result, premium credit cards cardholders reap the benefit, and the additional costs are reflected in higher menu prices for all restaurant customers and tighter margins for restaurant operators. The Competition Bureau has challenged Visa and MasterCard's unfair merchant rules. So basically what I'm asking for here, Mr. Chair, is that government take action to eliminate the honor all cards rule and permit surcharging, and that be included in the Code of Practice, or the Code of Conduct.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reynolds. Ensuite, Madame Brisebois, pour votre présentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to also add a few ad-lib notes.
First of all, I'd like to start off by thanking you. The Retail Council of Canada represents a small and medium and large enterprises throughout Canada, and our membership manages more than 84% of all retail sales throughout Canada, except for the auto sector. Total sales, $3 billion, and we employ 2 million Canadians. Today we'll be concentrating on import tariffs, in particular on finished products, and we've included in our presentation a list of the various tariffs that affect hockey equipment to give you an idea of what the effect is.
Move to part of my presentation in English that I do agree with Joyce on credit card fees, but that's where I would stop. We can debate the matter a bit later, even though I do have a lot of time and respect for you, Joyce. I won't agree on that one. But it will make at least the last session today a bit spicier than expected. Retail Council of Canada has submitted a proposal to the Department of Finance officials for the elimination of select tariffs where there is much competition for customers' business, where there's limited or no domestic manufacturing here, and where it mirrors the priorities of government, such as the support of health and well-being, sports and active living that is accessible to people of all income. So, Mr. Chairman, my remarks will be very short. I would like to ask the committee to support our initiative and our industry request to ensure that we eliminate key import tariffs on finished goods in the upcoming budget. And I would like to draw your attention to the fourth slide that we've provided in your deck, which shows a hockey player in a Canadian uniform, a hockey player in an American or U.S. uniform. And most importantly, ce qui est important, is that we show that with existing tariffs in Canada for identical equipment, it costs a family here $200 more to outfit a player in this country versus United States. En alignant nos tarifs,
if we were to align our tariffs, Canadian families would be saving $120 million.
$120 million. I will not go through all of the slides. I think we've spoken on this matter quite often, and it will be my pleasure to answer questions at a later time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. We'll begin members' questions with Ms. Nash, please.
Well, I have to start with you, Ms. Brisebois, the mother of 3 sons who are hockey players. It hits close to home, and I'm struck by the products that you list for which we have higher tariffs than in the U.S., but these are products that we don't manufacture here in Canada. So really, I guess your point is these are just a tax against Canadian retailers that isn't based on protecting an industry here in Canada. Is that the message that you're giving us?
Let me go back for a moment and say that the first round of tariff elimination on finished goods was around 1993. Very little has been done since then. The focus, understandably so, was on manufacturing and eliminating as many tariffs as possible for that sector. But things have changed, and we know that a lot of the products that are sold in retail stores in Canada and indeed in the United States are made in Asia. And what is important here is to ensure that there is a level playing field for families who are equipping kids, for example, to play hockey. And it's to ensure that, in fact, those tariffs on finished goods are reduced or eliminated.
I mean, I can see a logic where we have an industry here and we're trying to advance and promote that industry, but I guess what I hear you saying, it's really just the retailers that are being dinged with this. Let me ask you another question. Because of the increase in the last budget in the personal exemption for transborder shopping, is that something that is affecting retailers in border communities? Are you seeing an impact to your membership because people can claim a higher exemption when they go across the border to shop?
The greatest impact we've seen, well, the answer to the question, simple answer is yes. Families are very cost conscious. However, the impact has been greater, and Joyce would know this as well, in the food sector. The number one item that's purchased when people shop cross-border, especially one-day shopping, is for groceries. Most of those goods, and I know this is not a popular topic, but those are supply-managed goods. Dairy products, poultry, then gas, liquor, and cigarettes. Those are the products that are purchased on same day. And then the people who are traveling and purchasing those goods are also then purchasing other goods, as well as staying in restaurants and hotels. So there's no question that cross-border shopping has a huge impact on the entire community.
Yeah, I think the exemption wasn't just for one day, but it was for, I think the 48-hour exemption went up. And Ms. Reynolds, I hear your comments about the hot mozzarella competition, and I guess for both retail and in the restaurant sector, these are businesses. Some are large, but many of them are small entrepreneurs. I think of my own neighborhood, which is full of small restaurants and retailers. They hire locally. Often their products are local products. We've got some celebrity chefs in our neighborhood, which we prize, and you don't want to put barriers to that kind of local commerce because you are hiring a lot of people locally. And I hear from retailers and restaurateurs a concern about the credit card fees, that they're incredibly high And that is certainly an issue that many retailers and restaurateurs have raised with us. So I appreciate your point on that. Lastly, I just want to ask, from the boys and girls clubs, how do we stack up internationally when it comes to youth crime prevention? Because I don't feel we're putting enough money into that.
Just a brief response, please.
Yeah, I can't speak. I could verify that and report back to the committee, but off the top of my head, I can't. I don't know this international stats well enough to be able to see how we compare, but I would be happy to get back to you on that.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Nash. Ms. McLeod, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you to all the presenters, and again, very diverse and very important areas that we need to reflect on. I'd like to start with Ms. Aiken, and it was, of course, we've all been home for Remembrance Day week, and I had conversations in the riding that I represent. We have reservists, and a number of them had gone, had done tours of duty in Afghanistan, and certainly some have struggled on their return. And then I was talking to them about the care that was available, and what was something that stood out in my mind was some of them telling me they needed choices. So I sort of look at your comment that only a small percentage actually work through Veterans Affairs to get the care they need. These particular gentlemen said one found support locally with his church and with his psychologist. So talk a little bit more about how our veterans are seeking care, especially in the area of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. It's a great question, and I think, when we think there's 700,000 veterans and only 72,000 are clients of Veterans Affairs, they really are part of a healthcare system that doesn't understand them at all, their unique needs. We also know from the research that particularly mental health issues don't always show up right away when you return from a tour. Veterans Affairs will tell us that it can take 5, 10, even 50 years for a mental health problem to surface. And at that time, people aren't always capable of going back to Veterans Affairs and navigating the system in order to access benefits. So they really are part of a system that doesn't understand their unique needs. The research would also tell us that while there's some crossover, for example, post-traumatic stress disorder, really, military-related post-traumatic stress disorder is very different from trauma-related, where you're surprised by an attack or a traumatic event, whereas military are running headlong into it. So there are some differences, some subtle differences in the assessment and treatment of disorders like that. I also heard you ask the CEO of the Canadian Psychological Association about access to other professionals, and I think that's a huge issue in the Canadian system, that people, if they're clients of Veterans Affairs, they'll have access to physiotherapy and psychology and all of those things provided, whereas if they're just in the public system, they may not. If they don't have insurance, if they don't have health insurance, they don't have those things covered.
So would you say that I should be encouraging when I'm having these conversations for them to make those connections? And what would you say to the thought that they express in terms of this is where I'm comfortable seeking my care, even though it might not be as expert? I think not every community has the ability to provide that expert kind of service. So how do you provide outreach to your rural or your smaller urban areas, or how do they provide that expertise and outreach?
Right, and I think what's really critical in some of the work, as I mentioned, that I'm doing with a great team of researchers, is we really are trying to get that specific information into the hands of clinicians working on the front line in all communities across Canada. So we are looking at what are the specific health needs of veterans and working with the Canadian Medical Association to disseminate that to all Canadian primary care physicians. So we really are trying to get it into the communities, and I would agree with you. I would think that people don't want to leave their hometown to go seek care, and I do think if they get coverage by Veterans Affairs, they often don't have to. It's a health insurance system, right? It's not specific practitioners.
Your $50 million over 5 years, is that strictly research again, as dollars?
No, it'd be for research and policy implementation of policies and programs. So really working at the coalface to get cutting-edge research into the policies and practices that are happening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McLeod. Mr. Bryson, please.
Ms. Aiken, thank you all very much for joining us today. Have you calculated, Ms. Aiken, or Dr. Aiken, I'm sorry, the benefit to potential savings to Canadian governments at all levels of making this sort of investment? It stands to reason that if we conduct the kind of research you're speaking of, the social and economic benefits in the future ought to be quite significant in terms of a multiplier effect.
We haven't done the exact calculations, but really when you look at the numbers, 700,000 veterans, everybody's got family members, right? Parents, siblings, children. We know there's transgenerational impact of military service, and so ensuring that people have the best health care they can have within our system is going to make them more productive members of society. We already know that veterans, the majority of veterans who release feel underemployed. While their skills, their tangible skills may be used, the untangible skills that you learn in the military of loyalty, teamwork, resilience are not always harnessed and mobilized in the civilian workforce. So and not to mention the families, right? I mean, resilience is a very, very strong characteristic within the families as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. McBean, in 2006, the Stern report, Sir Nicholas Stern's report, identified the cost of not acting, but it really made the point that there's going to be massive global costs associated with climate change. Should we be putting line budgets or line items in budgets as governments, anticipating and preparing for those types of investments in the future? I visited a community in Newfoundland a couple of years ago where the mayor showed me a breakwater that was partially destroyed by more frequent and severe storms, and the only road leading into the town was being threatened. And so at some point that has to be addressed. Should we be anticipating and budgeting for that preemptively?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, certainly we should be making those investments in redeveloping our critical infrastructure. We are, let's say, have been reducing that infrastructure as a percentage of GDP over the last decade. And there is need for that kind of investment to reduce our impact. My colleague down the table of the Retail Council and the restaurant associations, for example, they rely on the fact that their customers can actually get to the stores and restaurants. And when a storm wipes out the bridge or wipes out Finch Avenue Road, as it did in 2005, which incidentally, that bridge, or sorry, the rainstorm that caused the wipeout of the Finch Avenue Bridge road was cost the insurance company $650 million, which meant they just applied it to the rest of us through premiums.
Thank you very much. Ms. Reynolds and Ms. Brisebois, the issue of credit card and regulatory framework, the voluntary code of conduct, is it has it achieved all of the objectives, or should we be looking at other models, including potentially the Australian model or other models that? And I guess lead to another question: which countries have it right in terms of regulatory framework around credit card charges to small business or to businesses?
I'll go first. The current voluntary code served an important purpose, which was to ensure that merchants could continue to accept Interact debit, which is a low-cost, flat-rate debit payment transaction, because the code basically allowed a merchant to say yes to Visa credit but no to Visa debit, which is what Joyce referred to earlier on as the honor all cards rule. And as you know, there is a case before the tribunal, and so it will be interesting to see if the tribunal in fact agrees that the honor all cards rule should be eliminated. Saying that, to answer the second part of your question, we believe that the voluntary code is working now, but we are concerned that it may not be tough enough going forward, considering what Visa has decided to do.
Okay. There's about 20 seconds. Ms. Reynolds, did you want to
No,
comment that?
that's okay. I would agree. I don't think there is a perfect system out there. What's interesting, what's happening in Australia, certainly the fees are lower, but the number of cards that they're introducing and the difference in fees between the cards, they're finding more and more of these premiums and super premium cards are coming on the market. So they haven't completely resolved the issue with legislation. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Gallant, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all my questions will be through you. My questions are going to be directed to Dr. Akins. Would you please tell us the types of research projects that you're coordinating that relate specifically to PTSD?
There are several projects going on, everything from the hard science side, looking at brain biomarkers of PTSD for diagnosis. So one of the big problems has been that it's difficult to diagnose between mild traumatic brain injury, which is very common in areas where things are exploding, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or that a person may suffer from both. And if you don't administer the correct treatment for the if you misdiagnose, you might administer the wrong treatment. So we have a really outstanding pan-Canadian team that we've managed to assemble looking at what are the brain biomarkers of PTSD to make diagnosis better. We also have groups of people looking at new treatment techniques, novel treatment techniques. And again, we've got one of the groups that works in one of the operational stress injury clinics that are funded by Veterans Affairs, coming to present to a whole group of civilian psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health workers at our upcoming forum. So getting that information on current best practice treatment that they've studied, they know is evidence-based, into the hands of frontline practitioners so that they can help the veterans. So we're working really at both ends of the spectrum.
And the universities, do they actually use soldiers and veterans as subjects in their studies?
Yes, the answer is yes, some of them. That hasn't been a smooth process to date, but it is now with the advent of us. We are able to work really closely with the government. We have a college of peer reviewers, so if people put forward research to us, we kind of screen it first. One of the issues is that we have quite a small military, and so you can't keep testing them for everything, and especially when we had a combat role in Afghanistan, some studies went over, some people went over and did studies and collected data, but you couldn't have everybody assessing the same roto every single time because, I mean, you get research fatigue or exhaustion. So what some of them are doing is working with other populations initially, and then bringing it to military populations once a methodology is well refined. Now, veterans are a different story. So, for example, the Operational Stress Injury Clinic, there are a lot of veterans, and so they really are able to work with patients and on a real-time program evaluate how it's working and bring that back to other clinicians who might be working with these populations as well.
What sort of studies are you coordinating in the area of suicide prevention, which is not necessarily related to PTSD?
No. Interestingly, if you look at the Canadian-specific literature, almost every study that talks about suicide does talk about PTSD, but you're exactly right. It isn't always related to PTSD. In fact, we know from our British colleagues that in Canada, the #1 mental health issue for people who've served in a combat role is depression, not post-traumatic stress disorder. The Americans tend to have more post-traumatic stress disorder, and the Brits tend to evolve to binge drinking. It's just I don't know if it's cultural differences or what. And so there are a few studies looking at suicide, and I think one of the issues is getting the data harnessed in Canada still. Like we still don't have, we have really good anecdotal data on suicide, but the large-scale studies are still not showing an increased rate in suicide in regular force males. The studies do show an increase in regular force females over the general population for suicide and in reserve force.
And when you're
30 seconds.
When you're looking at the stats, are you looking at only the suicides that actually follow through, or do you have access to the stats where there are suicide attempts?
We don't have access to those stats. No.
Thank you.
Yet.
Okay. Thank you. Let's go on. We'll go Monsieur Caron, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for coming. My question will be for Ms. Reynolds and Ms. Brisebois. Although we do agree on the question of credit card charges and debit card charges, I think that there is one thing I would object to in what you said is the supply management. I come from an area where that does depend on family farms, particularly dairy farms. And supply management at the present time is the only way in which these farms can survive at the present time. It's not a type of subsidy, but it is a way of ensuring that prices paid to the producers are not as volatile as they would be in the U.S., for example. We have to take into account, first of all, the volatility of prices in the United States between 2006 and 2008. The prices in the space of several months almost doubled when it came to milk, and then they went down by 75–80%, and this makes it extremely difficult for family farms to plan. And the second element is that we talk about lower costs for certain periods of time in the United States, but this depends on the volatility. American producers find themselves highly subsidized. We do not subsidize our producers to the same extent. In the United States, they do receive subsidies, so that there is a significant difference in the prices that are paid to producers and paid at the consumer level. I'd be interested in knowing what your reaction is with respect to your position on supply management. I realize that you are preaching on behalf of your own interests, but this would have an effect, of course, on the family farms. Ms. Reynolds, Ms. Brisebois.
It's in our interest as an industry to have a healthy dairy and poultry industry here in Canada. We're very dependent on the dairy and poultry industry. Unfortunately, what's been happening over the last several years is that these products, particularly dairy, are being priced off of our menus. If you look at restaurant menus in the U.S., you look at them in other countries, you see far more dairy on the menus. So in light of declining consumption, we think that it's within the interests of that sector as well as our sector as well as consumers to come up with a reform system that will allow us to grow the industry here.
Je vais vous poser une question rapide par rapport à ça.
I'd like to put a very quick question on this particular point. I understand what you're saying, but I don't know whether we agree on the extent of the problem. You probably are familiar with the figures that were put forward by the Milk Producers Association of Canada with respect to what restaurateurs obtain for a glass of milk. The producer only obtains 9%, $2.25, 21 cents a glass. The same applies. Pizza, $18 for a certain. The producer receives 67 cents. If supply management is so problematical when it comes to the why does the producer receive so little? If we're talking about the price paid to the producer as the main element, I would expect the producer to receive more, but the time being, it's only a matter of a few cents.
I can assure you that the margins in the restaurant industry are a whole lot lower than they are for the average dairy farmer. And if it was so advantageous for restaurants to have these items on their menu, why are they disappearing from the menus of restaurant operators? Why are they trying to find ways to offer a cheeseless pizza? I mean, mozzarella is considered gold.
Mais encore une fois, surtout dans une situation où ces prix-là, les prix américains sont soutenus.
American prices are being supported. The American prices are supported by the fact that producers are subsidized, but if they did not get the subsidy, if we were to eliminate supply management, there would certainly be a drop in the prices for you, but then this would have family farms would no longer be able to compete with the U.S. So I'd like to know how would you be able to reconcile this with the existence of family farms?
Yeah, I mean, we're all in favor of freer trade and less subsidies in all sectors. I think that's our major point. And although it isn't the government that subsidizes the dairy and poultry industry in Canada, consumers do, to the tune of billions of dollars. So there's definitely a subsidy program here. And in our mind, we need to have less subsidies and freer trade for all agriculture products.
Okay. Okay. Did you want to comment? Okay. Thank you. Merci. We'll go to Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here today. Ms. Cohen, you have a very interesting submission. I think we all admire the work that your organization has done, and we want to congratulate, I think, 100 years. Last year, was it, or this year?
Brothers Big Sisters is celebrating 100 years next year.
Oh, you're older.
Boys
than
and
that,
Girls Clubs, we're older. We're 113. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Wow. You in your submission, you talked about young people getting the skills that they need to enter the workforce, including computer communication, basic reading and writing skills. You're absolutely right. I think everybody agrees. I want you to tell us how the Skills Link and Career Focused Canadian Summer Job programs have helped to improve the participants' employment levels, and what results have you seen from youth that have participated in these programs? Mm-hmm. How many of them go on to post-secondary or find a level of employment, higher levels of employment? And you also mentioned your organization would like to see the Skills Link program enhanced. What enhancements would you like to see?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So our 100 clubs are all independent. So I don't have a full picture of everyone who's received funding from the Skills Link program. I know clubs talk about it a lot. The Summer Jobs program, many of them rely on the programs. So they train young people. For instance, the Winnipeg Boys and Girls Clubs, they run a summer learning program. So they hire young people to work with the summer learning program and to help make sure that young people don't lose ground over the summer. So young people who are living in neighborhoods that have high levels of poverty and we know lose ground during the summer. So these young people are benefiting from the summer program. They are going to the local universities, studying in education. So this is supporting their learning as they go along. Most of them are in education training already, and so they're in teacher training. So that's one example. I'd have to check to see how many go on, but I know that one of the things that clubs do is, because we're a fixture in communities, because people know us, they build relationships with the people in the clubs, we can offer more than just a job experience. We can offer a mentorship, a connection to their communities that can last for years over and beyond the employment programs. Anecdotally, the Kingston Boys and Girls Club ran a Skills Link program, a career program as well, and have said that they are very excited about running more. And so people are going on to post-secondary or employment, but I don't have any numbers for you.
What about the skills enhancement?
That's right. Well, I saw that there have been enhancements to these programs for 2 years, a commitment to increasing it by $50 million for 2 years. And I'm wondering, after these 2 years, what are projects for sustaining this level? Because I don't think we'll be resolving the issue around youth unemployment. It would be great to resolve it in 2 years, but I suspect that it'll take longer.
So you're looking for just a continuation of the program?
That would be a good start.
Okay, so really you have no suggestions as to, now that you've worked with the program, listen, this is something we could do a little bit better, or?
Yes, and I also saw that in the last call for proposals that most of the funding was going to the the career side, and I want to make sure that we don't forget about the skills link.
Okay.
For sure, there's a longer way to go for those young people, but we need every one of them to be ready and employed.
Okay, I don't have much time. I want to shift to 1 minute. Okay, maybe to the Aboriginal side. How can we better work with provinces and territories to ensure that all students, including Aboriginals, have the information access they need to begin a post-secondary education? Is there something that you see within your program that maybe can improve that? We all recognize that as an issue. And, is there some direction that maybe you could give?
Well, I would encourage you to work with Aboriginal organizations. I know you're already, the government already is, and so that is definitely the way to go. Some of our clubs serve high number of Aboriginal kids. The Saddle Lake Club is on a First Nation reserve. The Winnipeg Club has high levels of Aboriginal youth who participate. So just two examples. Some of the programs that we offer in some of these clubs we have a partnership with Rogers, for instance, that allows us to provide education support throughout their high school, make sure that they don't drop out, and that they have post-secondary funding, grants to pursue post-secondary education. So with Rogers, it's called Rogers Raising the Grade. This is a partnership that Boys and Girls Clubs has established. 25 of our clubs are involved. So those are initiatives where the private sector is getting involved and making a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. Mr. Marston, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Aiken, 1974, I worked on the railway. I was a signal maintenance man. I had 4 people killed on one crossing in an 11-month period. To this day, 48 years later, I have a recurring dream about once a month that I'm explaining to my supervisor why I hadn't tested those crossings properly. And so I think I have an understanding of PTSD. Back in those days, you didn't go to anybody for help, never even thought in terms of it. But, sometimes I wonder, the government as a whole, all of us in this room care about our troops. But I wonder if they really capture the sense of the seriousness of how many people in the military, both still in and veterans, who are suffering from this. We hear stories in the Parliament all the time about cutbacks to services. So I'm going to ask you, how would you categorize the funding status today? Is it as we've known it for a number of years? Is it less, or is it improving?
I think when we're looking specifically at mental health, the funding towards mental health treatment services within the military has improved. For veterans, it's the same as the rest of society because 90% of them are in the rest of society.
Sure.
So I think that probably it hasn't improved for veterans.
How close to adequate would you call it?
Well, it's interesting. Very anecdotally, when I released from the forces in 1998, we had just seen from 91 to 98, we had seen the first Gulf War, Rwanda, Somalia. We were starting to see an upscale of operations that was unprecedented. And in my last 4 years, just at the healthcare clinic I worked at, we saw a 3-fold increase of mental health need. And that has continued to increase and grow.
That was the point I was getting to. If you think in terms of, I had a very modest situation relative to what people saw and were involved with over there, so the lasting effects are obvious in my case and probably very, very obvious. They went through a lot more for an extended period of stress. Ms. Gulen, we've talked before. I'm a big supporter of the Kiwanis Boys and Girls in Hamilton East. That part of Hamilton, we've got a high level of high risk young people, young adults. And I'm a supporter of education. You talked about education as being the way out. I negotiated a labor studies program with our community college and that kind of thing. And I related to your presentation, but I would suggest that the intervention that I see in the Boys and Girls Clubs, that between getting out of school and when parents get home, is the essential ingredient. From your organization's on-the-ground view, what's the impact have you been seeing of mandatory minimum sentencing? We've had a fair amount of legislation in the last while where some people believe that's how you address the problem of the at-risk. has that made your organization's work more difficult? And if so, from a budgetary perspective, what can we recommend, or what recommendations rather could your organizations make to us that we could do to help you?
Mm-hmm. I am not frontline, and so I can't speak to that. And I haven't heard from clubs. I haven't heard clubs talking about the effect of the mandatory minimum. I have heard clubs talk about a lot about the importance of prevention and the difference that they can see it makes, and the youth that they see who are involved in gangs or in difficult situations most often are youth that have been traumatized. They've experienced violence in the home. Either they're born in a family that's already gang involved, or they're living on the street. So they are, to begin with, victims that we need to work with as well. And so they see issues like homelessness being a factor, drug use in the home, and so they're strong believers in prevention, and they see the value and the path that is possible for young people if they have the support that they need. And that support is based on relationships, and so long-term investment in young people, not just in and out of communities. And so
20 seconds.
Yeah.
That's it?
I think that's it.
20 seconds is
okay.
Will pass. Thank you.
Mr. Marston. Mr. Hoback, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here this evening. I think I'm going to direct my questions to both the restaurant and the retail sector, because I guess I'm looking for assistance to try to help me understand. You talked about supply and management and how the impact is on both your sectors. I guess I'm just wondering, well, you can't see a consumer just going across the border for a jug of milk. Like, it doesn't make sense to do that. So why would you say that's an issue in your sector? Can you explain that to me?
Answer that?
Sure.
It is indeed an issue, and it somewhat indirectly responds to Mr. Caron's question. Just the issue here is not the protection of farmers. The issue is that this year alone, consumers will spend between $15 to $20 billion in cross-border shopping. You only need to go to Billingham, just across from the BC border, and go to, I will not name the retail store, and there is even a Facebook page of American consumers who are angry because they can't get the chicken or milk or butter because of the number of Canadians emptying the shelves. Okay. So the point is...
Yeah, but the savings just for those items are so small. Like, how would that impact a family? Can you give me an idea?
We, in fact, chicken breast here is $6.92. In that store in the U.S., it's $3. I can tell you, sir, that impacts your budget if you have a family with young children. If you look at milk, it's the same, 92 cents, $2.40. Those are everyday items, which is in fact why that's the product that we've seen most purchased, because that's what affects everyone's budget more impactfully.
So then if you took those items and looked at an individual family or a family, a low-income family, that's substantial enough for them to go through the hassle, wait at the border, and actually go across the line and buy it?
Well, maybe because I'm obsessed with this, I spent quite a bit of time at Quebec, Ontario, British Columbia borders, and have followed people in malls, asked them to show me what they've purchased and how often they do it. And, sir, I was shocked.
Okay.
Shocked.
In the Restaurant Association, again, 2 ingredients, milk and eggs. They're small ingredients. They're not going to have a huge impact on the price of food that you're offering a customer, are they?
Well, you're just talking about milk and eggs, but we're talking poultry, we're talking cheese. I mean, cheese is a really big one. And if you look at the fact that there is a class of cheese just for pizza manufacturers, and the fact that it was necessary to give them their own class of cheese because of the concern that they would move south because the prices were so much cheaper with their manufacturing facilities. Fresh pizzerias don't have that option. They can't move south to avoid the high cost of high dairy products. So what are they stuck with? Prices that are 30% higher. So absolutely, the biggest inputs for restaurants are food and labor. And quite frankly, the supply managed products make a big portion of their food costs.
Okay. One of the other areas you talked about is the fees and credit card fees. I'm just kind of curious, looking for some input. You know, we're using different types of purchasing mechanisms now. I went to a movie this weekend. I bought the ticket online. I actually bought it on my Galaxy 3 phone. It was great. It was easy to do. I did it through PayPal. Are you seeing new types of technology such as that affecting your sector? And what do you think we should be doing to embrace those type of technologies to create more competition in that area with Visa?
Yeah, I would say that generally restaurants and retailers embrace those new technologies. We're seeing PayPal play a huge role, especially with smaller retailers, because they bring all of the different transactions together and provide a one cost. We're seeing most people now, when they go to movies, they will or tap and go, pay, or pay online. That's happening in stores and fast food. That's very, very common. I think most importantly for our businesses, when we look at the code of conduct, is to make sure that when you're given an application on your phone, a wallet, an app that allows you to pay, that we want to make sure that you're making the choice and not the bank that sent you the app, because we know the choice they'll make will be the most expensive one for the retailer.
Okay. I think I'll leave it at there, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hovac. Monsieur Maille, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank all of you for coming here today. I have a question for the Boys and Girls Club. There are a number of points that I found interesting in your brief. Canada Without Poverty did appear before the committee, and I did ask them the question, did the government keep its promise to eliminate poverty among children for the year 2000? And the answer I was given was this was not done. The government didn't do its job. And I note in your brief, you also talk about the fact that the government did develop a plan for dealing with poverty. Can you tell us a bit about what is being done and why we haven't been able to tackle this problem of poverty so far? The reason why we raise this point is because we are part of the campaign 2000, and we do support the attempt to eliminate poverty. There's a level of poverty, the success at school as well. We know that when people have difficulty at school, it's harder for them to find work, and they often have more precarious work and well-paid work. And we'd like to ensure that people do have a good opportunity to take part in the Canadian economy. But this was the reason then for our recommendation, and this is why we are a member of this coalition. I simply wanted to confirm that the problem has not yet been settled and there's a lot of work still to be done. You also talk about the fact that more should be done to provide assistance to young Aboriginal children. I think that you mentioned that there's greater access provided to education. What exactly is being done? This is something that is raised here because we are of concern. This is of concern to us. When we look at success, academic success, there's a significant gap between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal children, and that is a cause of concern. Once again, this is a gesture of solidarity towards our Aboriginal groups that are working to obtain concrete change, and I would encourage the committee to discuss this particular matter with them and how they would see action being taken. I'd like to follow up a bit on what my colleague Mr. Marston said when it comes to prevention. Often Quebec is used as an example, the prevention of crime among young people, and more money should be invested in prevention rather than repression. A reference was made to Bill C-10 and the fact that it might have had a negative impact. Perhaps you could explain to us what greater efforts could be made in the field of prevention. Of course, we do have to have various approaches. We would like to see more investment in prevention. I think that research has shown that this is worthwhile. It can be defended from an economic point of view as well. And we also think that it's important then to invest in prevention. 1 minute. I thought I had more time left.
Climate change to society, how much, and you gave us alarming number. Can you tell us what we should do more in terms of how much in terms of investment we should do in terms of prevent all these causes? I don't think we'll be able to prevent causes, but to actually acknowledge it and invest in.
Well, what we're proposing, and thank you for the question, is strategies that actively take under the approaches of reducing our vulnerability.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about, with my colleague next door here, trauma. The evidence from the Montreal ice storm of 1998 is that children who lived through that, some of them in their mother's wombs, are showing developmental difficulties, handicaps that will never be rectified. And the only way they can be rectified and help those children is through an active strategy of reducing risk, so we predict better when these events happen, and we make the infrastructure such that the power lines don't fall down, the bridges don't collapse, the sewers continue to run, and that means an investment in a climate change, weather, disaster risk reduction strategies that we do not have in Canada hardly at all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Mr. Mai. Mr. Carmichael, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. I have two questions. The first one to Madame Reynolds. Your submission to the committee outlines the importance of young workers to the restaurant and food service industry, and obviously by the scale of your industry, it's significant. And I'm confident that many in this room had their first jobs in the restaurant or food service. I know I did. You go on to say that modernizing our immigration system with a bias towards youth will help face labor changes. And I wonder if you can elaborate a bit on this, and how do we affect that without, in fact, impacting or disenfranchising more skilled workers coming into the countries, and should we do a better job with schools and universities?
Thank you for the question. What we support in terms of the modernization of the immigration laws that are currently underway is the real emphasis on bringing in people to meet the needs of the labor market. I mean, right now they're focused on highly skilled and semi-skilled workers. You know, we also have unskilled positions that are going unfulfilled. But what we like about the reforms is that there's a lot more emphasis on linking people wanting to immigrate with jobs, and there's much more emphasis on Canadian work experience. There's more likelihood that once people have come to Canada and worked in a job, become familiar with the work, and they get acclimatized in the community, that they're more likely to stay, as opposed to a situation where skilled workers apply to come to the country, and then they come in, and then they have to find their own way, as opposed to having already been linked with an employer who is already looking for those skills. And in terms of the second part of your question, absolutely, we have to work more closely with community colleges and universities. And clearly, it's within the interests of the community colleges and universities to ensure that they have that their graduates are successful in getting jobs. And so it's very important that we work with the community colleges so they understand what the labor market needs are, so that they are providing their students with the skills that are going to be meaningful when they actually graduate.
Good. Thank you very much. Madame Brisbois, one of my favorites or as an issue, and you talk about it in your submission with regards to Canada's need to develop a modern digital payment system. And we will be unable to compete in the digital economy of the 21st century if we don't. I wonder if you could elaborate on how Canada's current payment system is restricting economic growth and or hindering our true productivity. And in this regard, what modernizations would you suggest that we should be considering?
Thank you for the question. There's a fantastic report, which we'll make sure that we circulate. It was prepared by the Task Force on Payments that looks at the future of the digital economy, specifically from a payments perspective. So there are different elements. One of them is what we discussed earlier on, the technology that we're now seeing online, that we're seeing in some of the stores or gas stations. But other technologies are, for example, Canada is behind when it comes to, especially business to business, when it comes to paying electronically. We still are processing way too many checks. And so the study itself, and again, we'll make sure that you get a copy, has done extensive research, or the group has done extensive research to look at Australia, the UK, and a few other countries that have invested heavily to ensure that, in fact, both government and business are transacting digitally. And so...
30 seconds.
Sorry. So those are generally the areas. I don't have the specific numbers, but I'll make sure you get them.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carmichael. I'm going to take the last round here as the chair. First of all, Dr. Aiken, I just wanted to briefly ask whether how many partnerships or what types of partnerships you have with institutions like the Glen Rose Rehab Hospital in Edmonton. Can you just give us an indication of the type of partnerships you have with these types of facilities?
Yeah, absolutely. We sort of went in with a bottom-up approach. So we went in at the level of the researcher and clinician who would be working with military and veterans. And so when we were signing memoranda of understanding, we did that with the universities. But of course, all of the rehab institutes like the Glen Rose work with us. They are, by virtue of U of A having signed the MOU, they work with us. And in fact, across the country to date, 3 research chairs have been stood up that will be there in perpetuity so the research can continue. And one of them is Dr. Jackie Hebert from the Glen Rose. She's a physiatrist there who works on the new computerized rehab network, and she's one of our very prominent researchers working right at the, with veterans, getting them rehabbed quickly. She's one of the top amputee researchers in the country.
So the $50 million you're asking for is actually for this network and that goes across the country in terms of the research?
Absolutely, yeah. And as you can see from our handout there's 26 universities and growing. So. Okay,
I just wanted to make sure I had that correct.
Certainly.
I wanted to turn, Ms. Breesbaugh, on the tariff issue, and you lay it out very well here in your notes. I mean, obviously the challenge is there's an awful lot of revenue raised on an annual basis from the tariffs. So you make your points very well. As you or your association, and we've talked about this privately, but could you sort of give us some guide as to how you would perhaps phase these out over a longer period of time, such that the fiscal cost to the government would be sort of absorbed over a long-term period rather than over a short-term?
Yes, thank you. We have. In fact, in our submission to the Department of Finance in October, we identified key areas, specific products, where we would see both an elimination or a phased out. Those 3 categories have been identified as being dealt with immediately because of the competitive nature of the product, but the others, which is a huge range, as you know, of tariffs, we've suggested that they be eliminated over a period of time. Keeping in mind, Mr. Chairman, that the Department of Finance has told us that they would lose around $700 million in tariffs and in revenue. Annually, if they were to eliminate those tariffs. However, if you calculate that's $20 billion in cross-border shopping, no one needs to do the math to consider how much tax revenue we're losing. So to ensure that there's a level playing field and that retailers can be competitive, I think at the end of the day, will benefit both government and the economy.
Okay, appreciate that. Now I have 2 minutes left, and I'm not sure I'm wise at doing this, but I'm going to jump into the supply management debate. For fun, I go out to Wainwright, where my dad is from, and Uncle Charlie, who has dairy and poultry, and Uncle Robert has beef, and if I just want to see them fight, I just say, what do you think of supply management? And the two of them go at each other like cats in a bag. You know, but the reality is, I mean, if you look at sort of Charlie's farm, three-generation farm, it is true. I mean, it is a form of subsidy in some way by the consumer of these products. But I think you have to take the point that there would be some dislocation of an awful lot of producers like my uncle, because I don't see how, if you take chickens, which Ms. Reynolds used as the example, I mean, I don't see how that kind of family farm, which is fairly large, competes on economies of scale with the massive enterprises in the U.S. So the prices would be lower for consumers, absolutely true, but I think you'd have far fewer producers like that, and I think that's what we need to have in the supply management debate, whether the country decides to change it or not. You are going to have some dislocation. It's not just a consumer issue, it is a producer issue as well.
That's the reason that in our brief we're saying we can't, you know, put our head in the sand and hide from these issues. We have to look at, I mean, Canada is trying to negotiate a European trade agreement. Canada's trying to negotiate a Pacific Rim trade agreement. You know, wouldn't we rather, as a nation, work on solutions and come up with something now, as opposed to having something imposed on us later on? I think that there's a real opportunity to say you've got some interested industries that want to be part of the solution and to work with these sectors to try to come up with solutions so that the displacement is minimized. That's what we're asking for.
Okay, I appreciate that. My time is up. It's a very large debate, and we'll have to get into it later with obviously experts like Mr. Hoback and Mr. Caron. I do want to thank all of you for presenting and responding to our questions on the issues. It was a very interesting panel. I do want to apologize for the temperature in this room. We've had many complaints about the cold temperature here, so I'm going to put it on the record as the Finance Chair. If someone at Public Works could please fix the temperature in this room. I've had multiple complaints from colleagues and witnesses, and hopefully we will have it fixed. But thank you all for appearing today.